Okay, looks like we're on now. Okay, so good morning, everyone, to the Community Infrastructure Service Committee of Monday, December 7th, 2020. Uh, Just wanted to let everyone know we do have 17 members of delegation, and just for the public, we are only going to limit questions to delegations for questions of clarification in order to be efficient with our time and for our day ahead. We do have a really long day scheduled ahead. And so just to let everyone know, due to COVID-19 and the recommendations by Waterloo Region Public Health to exercise physical distancing, City Hall is open for select services. Members of the public are invited to participate in this meeting electronically by accessing the meeting live stream video at kitchener.ca, whatever that is, watch now. While in person, delegations requests are not feasible at this time. Members of the public are invited to submit written comments or participate electronically in meetings by contacting Diana Sanderson, Committee Administrator at diana.sanderson@kitchener.ca. Delegates must register by 4:30 p.m. on December 4th, 2020 in order to participate electronically. Written comments will be circulated prior to the meeting and will form part of the public record. And I think there was a couple of items that were circulated um, electronically. And so with that, we will start off with consent items. Do I have a mover for the consent items? Councillor Galloway Seelock. Do I have any questions? I see no questions. All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. That's wonderful. All right, good start. So before we begin with the delegations, I just want to let delegations be aware that they do have 5 minutes to state their comments and let them know that that I will be keeping track of their times. Just so if they can stay within the time frame, that would be great. Thank you. And so our first item of the agenda today is dealing with the protected bike lanes, cycling downtown cycling grid. And we do have a 5-minute staff presentation. I'm assuming Aaron's going to be doing that. I just didn't, not there yet.
Yeah, that's me, Bill, if you can hear me. That's Darren here.
Oh, Darren. Okay, Darren.
Sorry, and I just get a phone call as that's coming through, so I'll decline that. If you're ready, I'll say good morning. And thank you very much, City Council, for the opportunity to speak to this project. Clerks, if we can go to the next slide. Kitchener's strategic plan isn't the city's plan, it's our community's plan for action, and it was created through extensive consultation with the people who live, work, and play in our city. And they identified the need for more transportation options to get downtown. So the proposed protected downtown cycling grid delivers City Council's commitment to install a continuous and protected cycling network that connects adjacent neighborhoods to the downtown. Next slide. Downtown is undergoing a pretty incredible transformation, and workplaces and homes are being built as we speak. There's going to be up to 5,000 people moving into downtown in the coming years, and we need to maximize every inch of the public right-of-way space to both move people and create attractive and vibrant streetscapes. Cycling can move 4.5 times more people than motor vehicles, and when combined with the INLRT, bus transit, and walking, residents have real choice as an alternative to owning and operating a vehicle, which can reduce the traffic and parking pressures that come with the growing downtown. Next slide. Affordability continues to be a growing challenge for Kitchener residents. After housing, transportation costs are a major portion of household expenses. Households that can reduce their car ownership from 2 to 1 or 1 to 0 can save up to $10,000 annually, freeing up disposable income to spend at shops, restaurants, and cultural attractions. And studies have shown that cyclists are extremely loyal to small independent businesses, fitting with their desire for an urban and authentic lifestyle. For those on a low income who can't afford a vehicle in the first place, which is a fair portion of our population, cycling can replace some taxi or transit trips, saving residents some much needed money to spend on other critical needs. Next slide. Transportation emissions are by far the top source of emissions in the region at 49%. And shifting some trips from motor vehicles to bicycles, especially those that are less than 5 kilometers, is essential to reaching climate action targets. Next slide. And of course, I'd be remiss without talking about COVID. It has impacted every aspect of life, including cycling. In Kitchener, trail counters show that cycling volumes have nearly doubled since 2019, consistent with the cycling boom seen across the world. And while many of these trips are more recreational or exercise-based in nature, there is clear evidence from other cities that a strong recreational cycling culture does transition to a strong transportation cycling culture with the right strategic investments. When many office workers return to work, they may find they don't want to give up their recreational bike rides, and the best way to incorporate them into their new routine is through their commute. Next slide. So success for this project is to see a growing portion of trips in the downtown taken by cycling, and several factors make downtown an ideal location to generate new cycling trips, including the mostly grid pattern street network, density, land use, mix, population, and employment density. Next slide. More than 61,000 residents live within a 15-minute bike ride of the downtown, which extends to the edges of Stanley Park, Victoria Hills, and Uptown Waterloo. So if just 3% of these residents choose to bike downtown on a semi-regular basis, the daily ridership would equal that of the Iron Horse Trail. Next slide. Downtown also has a high proportion of demographics that are typically attracted to cycling, including trail riders, students, tech workers, condo or apartment dwellers, and transit riders. Next slide. So capitalizing on this latent cycling potential requires a connected cycling network that is attractive to all ages and abilities. The network that staff are proposing today was developed through the Cycling and Trails Master Plan, and I'll explain a bit of the process that community members and staff use to develop this network. Next slide. Through several workshops, focus groups, and events with various stakeholders, a study area was set with a primary focus in the downtown proper and a secondary area of neighborhoods adjacent to it. Next. The network isn't starting from scratch, but is building on the Iron Horse, Spurline, and Great Trail, which have a combined summer ridership of nearly 20,000 per month. Next slide. The past several years have seen strategic investments in the cycling network feeding into the downtown, and the grid can tie them all together. Especially notable is the new Iron Horse to Transit Hub Trail being led by the region. That's number 4 on your screen, and is scheduled to be completed in 2022. Next slide. Of course, we also know most people are wanting to take the ION, and they're willing to take about 10 minutes to do that. With safe cycling routes feeding those stations, a larger proportion of residents can be within a range of an LRT station. Next slide. After analyzing the existing network, community members, staff, and consultants reviewed each north-south and east-west corridor. Next slide. And I won't go into the rationale for each street, but the pros and cons of every street was identified, both for cycling, as well as some of the other factors. Next slide. Such as existing conditions, current street uses, and impacts to other modes of transportation. Again, all of these factors were tested through multiple rounds of consultation, with City Council recently approving the network through the Cycling and Trails Master Plan. Next slide. We're almost finished here. Through the direction provided by the master plan, staff identified the most appropriate design for each street, with separated bike lanes acting as the spine on busier streets and neighborhood bikeways and trails feeding into those spines. Next. Adding all the ages and abilities cycling infrastructure to the downtown can't be implemented without some impacts to the overall street network. So an independent traffic study was conducted to assess the impact on motor vehicle traffic and movement, concluding that streets like Charles Street, Weber Street, and Frederick Street in Benton would see increased traffic, but they have sufficient capacity to handle that and won't see increased congestion. Next slide. You'll recall the strategic plan gave a deadline of 2022, which staff were on track to meet before the pandemic hit. However, due to the challenging fiscal situation the city is in, staff proposed phasing this project over 3 years, completing in 2023. With the 3-year phasing approach, the $5.9 million capital project can be funded through usual annual allotments through development charges, a tax capital reserve, and parking enterprise, as well as a one-time contribution from the federal gas tax. A 3-year phasing approach also allows the operating cost impact to be managed incrementally, with $120,000 first being allocated in 2022 and growing each year to $240,000 in 2024. This phased approach also gives staff time to evaluate maintenance practices each year to identify efficiency in maintaining this new type of infrastructure. Next slide. The design of the separated bike lanes are new to Kitchener, but well tested in other cities like Hamilton, Ottawa, and Montreal. Bidirectional bike lanes on one side only create a trail-like experience in the heart of the downtown, so cyclists can move around debris or pass slower moving cyclists without fear of vehicles encroaching in their space. The poured-in-place concrete median provides an essential safety barrier from vehicles, while also providing enough separation to remove the feeling of cars kind of whizzing right past you. We know from studies and consultations that when cycling infrastructure is both safe and comfortable, it becomes attractive for all ages and abilities and can see the type of increase of cyclists that we're looking for. Next slide. The design includes space allocation for up to 178 new bike parking spaces, and a large portion of that will ultimately facilitate the launch of a bike share program, which is another City of Kitchener strategic plan action item. Next. Complementing the separated bike lanes are neighborhood bikeways through residential neighborhoods. To qualify as a designated bike route, it must meet specific thresholds of less than 500 vehicles per day and less than 40 kilometers per hour speeds. And where we don't already meet those measures, there can be specific design treatments to get those volumes and speeds. Next slide. Consultations for this project have been ongoing for the past 2.5 years, with over 5,000 residents commenting through the strategic plan, cycling and trails master plan, and final 60% design renderings. During the final phase, 74% of respondents were in support of the bidirectional separated bike lanes identified in the grid. But more importantly, staff heard several localized concerns that were able to be addressed through design improvements, which are listed on page 6-15 of your report. Next slide, and the last one. The protected downtown cycling grid presented today delivers on its strategic plan in 2 key ways. The grid is continuous, providing a seamless network that can make residents confident their destination is either on a safe bike route or just a block or 2 away. And the grid is protected, providing the necessary safety measures that attract up to 60% of the population who say they want to bike more but don't feel comfortable riding in mixed traffic. The grid is the latest of several strategic investments in the downtown to continue to position it as a thriving, vibrant place to live, work, and play. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Darren, for your presentation. Very well put. Okay, I'm just going to go now to the panelist list and see who's up first for delegations. Travis Weber. So is Travis Weber up? Welcome, Travis.
No, Tavis.
Oh, Tavis, sorry.
That's all right. I get it all the time.
I have a stepson named Travis. So
Yeah, no worries.
Okay, go ahead whenever you're ready.
Hi, my name is Tavis Weber. I own Golden Hearth Bakery, corner of King Street and Cedar Street. I am here speaking basically on behalf of this proposal. This is a fantastic idea. I don't have a lot to say, and there's 17 delegates, so I'll just keep it brief. Cycling downtown is not that much fun right now, I'll be honest, as a cyclist. Lots of cars, not a lot of separate safe spaces. So this is definitely great for bringing people downtown. As a small business, that's who we rely on. So thumbs up for this. Yeah, that's it.
Okay. Thank you. I see that we have no questions of clarification. Okay, thank you, Tavis.
You're welcome. Cheers.
Our next delegate is Brian Baker. Welcome, Brian. If you can unmute yourself.
There we go.
There
Yes,
you
my
go.
name's Baker and I live at 165 Duke Street at the corner of Cedar. This address is a 68-unit Market Lofts condo adjacent to the Kitchener Market. Our particular unit overlooks Duke and Cedar Streets, so I get a good view of the traffic almost 24 hours a day. My background is 30 years as a municipal engineer for traffic, construction, and public works. My primary focus this morning is the downtown bicycle grid and how it impacts our condo and our immediate neighborhood. Now, even though we've done a lot of good work as far as spreading the word about this particular project, there's a lot of people that don't. If you're not interested in bicycling, and most people aren't in our neighborhood, you don't understand the impact to what this project is going to have by turning our streets into one-way streets with a raised concrete median down the center of the roadway. In our situation here on Duke Street, the eastbound lane is going to be the opposite side of the street, which is a major issue for us. So pickups and deliveries to our lobby, which you can imagine are very extensive this time, taxis, delivery vehicles, they're going to come on the other side of the street, and obviously they're going to have to take some time to park. And what is going to happen to the traffic behind them because they can't get around because of this proposed concrete median. So this is going to be a major, major disruption to all our residents and the businesses in this area as well. We're also losing 5 to 7 public parking spaces. They're going to be reduced to 3. Those are used not only by people visiting the condo, because we all park underground, but also by the adjacent businesses. In my view, this raised concrete barrier needs to be eliminated. It has not been used in the city before, and certainly not on a single lane, low volume, low speed roadway such as Duke Street. Now, Cedar Street between Weber and Church is similarly being converted to a one-way southbound vehicular traffic. So this means everyone entering the parking garage, which all our residents live in or have vehicles parking in the parking garage, we need to travel around the block now using King Street or other streets such as Cameron and Madison to get into the parking garage. This is the same situation getting out of the parking garage. Every vehicle that exits the parking garage now is going to have to turn right and move up towards King Street. So there's going to be lots of out of the way travel as a consequence and more traffic on King. For example, on Saturdays, I'll have to travel an extra 5 blocks around to be able to get into the parking garage. This is a major inconvenience for us and also the residential neighborhoods, neighbors on both Duke and Cedar. And of course, the hundreds of users of the underground parking garage and the Kitchener Market as well. This proposal is going to cause more traffic to move into the residential neighborhoods on Duke, Madison, Cameron, and Pandora, which are already designated the City of Kitchener slow streets. Imagine yourselves, would you feel like when you normally have a choice of 4 different directions when you leave your particular block? Now we're going to only have one way to go. We have to go up to King Street, which is not the best way to go. Lots of congestion and is opposite to where most of our destinations are. Now, turning Cedar into a one-way street is going to be a major traffic change for literally hundreds and thousands of motorists. This is a major north-south collector street from Cortland Avenue all the way to River Road. And now all that northbound traffic is now going to have to find an alternate route. You wouldn't believe the amount of trucks and heavy vehicles that even use Cedar Street. Actually, Duke Street provides a very good detour route when there is problems on King Street and or Weber. Now, there's numerous major streets such as Victoria, Sterling, East, River, and Krug. They've been recently successfully converted to separate bike paths, and they've accomplished that very easily with paint markings. But all of a sudden here on Duke and Cedar, which are narrow 2-lane roadways, we need concrete barrier curbs. These separated bicycle lanes are going to require more costly winter maintenance program. More salt's going to be needed on the bicycle lanes because there'll be no motor vehicle traffic on them. I can tell you, living here for years, there's very, very little bicycle traffic on both Duke and Cedar. It's very minimal. I'm talking less than a dozen a day. The city's recently spent $30,000 for a bicycle lockup in the market garage. I have never yet seen a bicycle parked in there. And this is supposed to be the year of the bicycle. And it is, in some ways you see them on the Iron Horse Trail, but imagine spending $30,000 and I bet you haven't got 6 people that have ever used it. Is this expenditure and disruption worth it when the bicycle lanes aren't going to be used for 4 to 6 months in the winter? I mean, we're going to be looking out there, seeing half the roadways on either side of our building vacant. As a pedestrian, my wife and I walk every day 4 to 5 kilometers. We don't even have the assurance of properly maintained sidewalks in the winter months, but the bicycle lanes are going to get first-class service. Certainly annoying to many of us that walk daily. really, is this $6 million project high priority in this times of financial need? It's really hard to believe it is for me. So I'll just leave you with three or four thoughts. The Duke Street and Cedar Street one-way should not proceed until such time that the Duke Street from Frederick to Water and Pandora to Sterling are completely connected to the overall grid. Basically, what you have now is a short 3-block section of Duke from Cedar up to Frederick that's going to be converted to 1 lane, but you haven't got approval to go further west towards Water Street. And at the far end, down at Pandora, the bike path that already exists just T-bones and it doesn't connect anywhere to the Iron Horse Trail. If you do choose to proceed, and I can see that you're probably going to, at least eliminate the raised concrete median. Install a painted median with the flexible bollards that give some separation until you really can assess the full impacts of this change. For example, this morning, Kitchener-Wilmot Hydro was out on Cedar Street just for 5 or 10 minutes. If you have a center barrier curb, nobody's going to be able to get by them. On Saturday, there was a truck delivering appliances to one of the residents here. He parked out there for about 10 to 12 minutes, delivering appliances. Cars just went around him. But how is that going to happen now with a barrier right down the middle? People are going to be backed up behind anybody that stops. And the same here when we get deliveries. How are people going to get around a vehicle that stopped when there's a center raised median? Now, I've raised many other issues too, but we'll leave that with you. I just want to leave you with one final note. If you read the Toronto Star, you'll see last week they had a separated bikeway. They removed it after 5 months. $250,000 wasted because there was so much opposition. And I maintain here that there's many hundreds and thousands of people that have no idea the impact on this particular Cedar Street going to 1-way. So I ask you to take a look at it. Certainly don't build this short section, if you can't do the whole thing. It's going to be, I guess, a decision between the region as to whether you can proceed up on the section from Frederick up to Water Street. So that's my thoughts. If I could see the bicycle traffic, I would understand it. And it's been handled very well elsewhere. I'm not opposed to bicycling. There's many excellent projects that you've done. But to put a concrete median down Cedar and Duke is physically impossible for us. And to lose our parking, it's not just our parking, it's for the businesses locally. There's 3 or 4 lawyers' offices. I see people arriving here at 8:30 in the morning and they don't leave till 5:30 at night. So thank you for your time. I hope you'll consider our points of view in our neighborhood because it's very definitely a big impact.
Okay. Thanks, Brian. We do have a question for you from a member of Committee of Clarification, Councillor Marsh.
Thank you. Thank you, Brian, for coming in. I really appreciate many of the points that you make. They're valid points. I just want to ask you, after our meeting with members of your condo board, did you hear back from anyone about whether or not they share your point of view?
In our condo, I haven't surveyed our condo. I don't feel that's my responsibility, really.
It's not. I'm just asking. I was just asking. Yeah, that's fine.
I have put it on our Facebook page, and people have come, especially about losing the parking and particularly the deliveries. How are we going to get deliveries? We have one lady here that's amazing. She is totally blind. She works at Laurier University teaching music. She takes a taxi to and from work every day. Now she gets picked up right in front of the door. Now I guess she's going to have to cross the middle of the block, cross to the other side of the street, and the taxi, I don't know how the taxi is going to have to be just pick her up and away they go. So no, there's a lot of people quite opposed to it, and neighbors don't even realize what's happening. I talked to the fellow across the street. He says, I got the message, but I don't care about bicycling. And I said, you realize you're going to have 1-way traffic with a median down? He says, you're kidding. That's crazy.
Okay. Thank you very much. I'll have questions of staff about this topic later. Thank you very much for making time to share your points.
Okay.
Thanks, Brian. That's all we have for you. Our next delegate is Sharon Hutton. Welcome, Sharon.
Hi, good morning. Thank you to City Council for allowing me to speak to this initiative. Sorry, I don't know why I'm kind of blurry. Anyway, my name is Sharon Hutton and I am the Executive Director of Cycling into the Future. The vision of our charitable organization is to make sure that every child in the Waterloo region owns a bike and receives comprehensive training on how to use it. Our program focuses on working in schools in the grade 5 level, grade 5 or 6. We've been partnering with the City of Kitchener since 2014 to provide our program. And since 2014, we've trained over 2,000 Kitchener students on how to ride safely and competently in their neighborhoods. So we're actually so pleased with the city's plan to develop this downtown cycling grid. We believe that the cycling infrastructure outlined in this plan will encourage many children and their families to choose cycling as a viable transportation option in the downtown and beyond. I also want to mention the 3 main ways the downtown cycling grid will encourage children and their families to bike more often. First of all, the cycling grid will make bike access to schools much safer and more inviting. Students at schools within the area of this grid and just beyond its borders will find this infrastructure beneficial. This would include 6 elementary schools: Sotheby, King Edward, Maple Grove, Shepherd, St. Anne's, Carmichael, and St. John's, 2 senior schools, Cortland and Margaret Avenue, and 2 secondary schools, Cameron and KCI. Secondly, Cycling into the Future includes a significant on-road training module. This includes teaching students how to use the cycling infrastructure in and around their schools. We will train students to use the nearby separated bike lanes, protected intersections, multi-use trails, and neighborhood bikeways when we work at the 6 elementary schools mentioned above. When these students graduate and move on to local senior and secondary schools, they will take this knowledge and experience with them. Training is an important and sometimes missing component of infrastructure development. So we feel that our training will help the community develop best practices and cycling etiquette appropriate for the situation. Parents are much more willing to allow their children to cycle to school when they know that they are using carefully designed infrastructure and benefiting from the high quality training. Finally, the downtown cycling grid will encourage families beyond the downtown area to move in and out of the downtown more safely and seamlessly. The City of Kitchener has done a good job of connecting this downtown cycling grid to the Iron Horse, Spur Line, and other cycling developments outside of the downtown area. We believe this will help Kitchener move towards its vision for having trails and cycling that connect the city and create a sustainable, safe, equitable, and healthy community for everyone. Cycling into the Future is on this journey with you. Thank you.
Thanks, Sharon, for your presentation and first time hearing of your organization. Very, very neat. Okay. We don't have any questions of clarification.
Okay.
Thank you. So our next delegation is Sam Lambden.
Laban, that's okay.
Welcome, Sam.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to speak this morning. I wanted to express my support for the downtown protected cycling route. I was categorically delighted when I heard about the news. My wife and I, we have 2 children. We live in the Cedar Hills neighborhood. We have a 4-year-old and a 6-year-old, Jesse and Rose. You'll meet them in a second. We drive. But we also walk and take the bus and use the LRT, and we ride our bikes. And we support the downtown protected cycling grid because for us, safe streets make adventures possible. Because of safe routes, next slide, please. Clerk, next slide. Oh, thank you. Sorry, previous slide, I was looking at a different thing. So yes, because of bikes and protected bike lanes, we ride to catch minnows. This is Jesse and Rose earlier this summer in Monarch Woods. Monarch Woods is 5 kilometers from our house. We can get there crossing three bridges. We take a tunnel under Westmount Road and we never have to ride on a road. Next slide, please. We ride our bikes to spot trains. This is Jesse actually from a couple of years ago. This is up in Waterloo Park. We go there to look at the animals. We go there to watch the LRT trains go by. We go there to use the pump, the water pump and sand park. Next slide, please. We also ride to watch ducks. This is Jesse and Rose looking at Schneider Creek, right next to Joseph Schneider House. Next slide, please. We also take road trips with our friends. These are Jesse and Rose on Rose's 6th birthday from May of this year. That's with her best friend Adrian and his sister Eloise. We took bike lanes all the way to the Henry Sturm natural area where they've renaturalized the creek there. Next slide, please. We also ride to Grandma and Grandpa's. Grandma and Grandpa have a swimming pool. This is where Jesse and Rose have been learning to swim. So we use bike lanes to do all kinds of adventures. We ride to Grandma and Grandpa's, we ride to see friends, but we also visit local businesses that we can ride to. Next slide, please. This is Jesse eating, that's a 4-roll raspberry lemon ice cream that he was eating uptown. Other local businesses that we can actually ride to include places like Arabella Park, Wordsworth Books, King Street Cycles, For All, Schreider's Furniture, to name just a few. Next slide, please. We also ride to get bagels. This is Jesse eating a City Cafe bagel. He loves them with cream cheese. So these are all the, next slide, please. These are all the kinds of places that we can currently ride to. And all these adventures are made possible by the safe, separated cycling routes that we can use. Next slide, please. Okay. One of the other delegates mentioned about painted sidewalks. I ask you all, and this is courtesy of a friend, my friend Tom Flood, is this a safe option for anyone? This isn't, but this could be Cedar Street. This could be Queen Street. This is what we're being asked to do if we want to ride with our kids to certain parts of the city. Next slide, please. So all these places in blue in the map, hopefully you can see it there. These are places that we ride to. We ride to all these different places, but there's no safe way for us to ride to the east side of the city. All of those red dots are the places we'd like to be able to go, but we can't currently. Next slide, please. We want to be able to ride to school, but we can't. Jesse and Rose both go to Sudbury Public School. It's just over 1 kilometer from our house, and the kids have never ridden their bikes there. Next slide, please. We want to be able to ride to basketball and swimming, but we can't. Before COVID, at least, the kids were in programs every Saturday morning at either the Bright Up Center or the Stanley Park Community Center. This is where we go for swimming and basketball and gymnastics and dance. We've never ridden to either community center, and they're closer than Monarch Woods. So they're closer than 5 kilometers to our house. Next slide, please. We want to be able to ride to Edie's house and to AJ's house and to Ruth's house, but we can't. Edie and AJ and Ruth, these are some of Rose's best friends from school. Edie lives off Margaret Street, AJ's on Horner Avenue, and Ruth's on Ellen Street, but we can't ride to any of their houses. Next slide, please. We want to be able to ride to all these places too. That's Show and Tell Coffee, that's Legacy Greens, that's the museum, that's the train station, that's the Cafe Pirates Outpost, that's Smile Tiger. We want to be able to ride to the new square at City Hall once it's opened. Now, I get that some people are concerned about having to find new routes to drive around downtown. We live on Madison Avenue, and we'll have to adjust the routes we normally drive to, but we'll happily do that in exchange for reduced speed limits and safe bike lanes. So for all sorts of reasons, I'm trying to make it as normal for our kids to ride their bikes somewhere as it is to drive. And I want to be able to take them on different kinds of biking adventures to do that. Next slide, please. So that's why I support the protected downtown cycling grid. Thank you.
Thanks, Sam. We don't have any further questions of clarification. Our next delegation is Alex Kinsella.
Sorry about that.
Welcome, Alex.
I had to take myself off mute.
Yeah, no worries.
Hi, my name is Alex Kinsella, and I'm here to speak in favor of the cycling grid on behalf of Communitech and others in the tech community. I'll keep this short and sweet. We were able to see a presentation of the plan early on, and looking at the ways that downtown Kitchener has evolved and is continuing to evolve with the expansion of the University of Waterloo Health Center, all the companies that are making downtown Kitchener their home office. We're excited to see this cycling grid open up access for more people to cycle into downtown, and not just to work, but also to support the local businesses that have been suffering during the COVID-19 pandemic. We're excited for what's going to come after COVID, when workers return to downtown and get out and explore our shops and restaurants of downtown Kitchener.
Okay. We do have a few. I don't know who went first, so I'll just go with Councillor Chapman.
Thank you. Alex, you said you saw an early version of what was being proposed, and you may have noticed that the direction that was originally proposed on Joseph Street was from Victoria to Queen, and now that's been reversed. How do you see this modification?
Between that modification and also the modification of removing the one-way on Ontario Street, I think both of them seem to still, keep the idea and the benefits of the program in the right way. Many people come from this side of town, so the Waterloo kind of border side. So heading down on Joseph towards heading down that way is still acceptable. It still seems to work.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Johnson.
Yes, thank you. Hi, Alex. I was wondering if you could comment on usage of bikes in the tech community. I know every time I go to Communitech, the bike cages there are full, etc. But I was wondering if you could maybe comment on that, please.
Yeah, it's something even within Communitech, you haven't seen it because no one's been inside the hub in a while. They've expanded and created a new bicycle area because the existing facilities were already full. And especially in winter when people don't want to lock their bikes outside, they're looking for other spaces. So there's more additional spaces now within the building. Cycling has only continued to be a main mode of transportation as more and more people move into condos with lower parking minimums and opt to not own an automobile. So cycling has become the way to go.
Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Singh.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a clarification question. Alex, thank you for presenting. You referenced Communitech. Are you representing Communitech, or you work with Communitech, but the views that you're stating are your own?
They're my own views, but I'm representing Communitech on the call today.
Okay, excellent. I think that's good for us to know. Thank you, Alex.
Thank you. Mayor Verbanovic.
Thanks, Alex. Great to see you. Quick question. As we continue to grow, and as you know, we just recently approved the new health innovation arena and so on. Do you see the demand and the pressures for this kind of cycling infrastructure to only grow exponentially going forward?
Yeah, the health science campus and the expansion of Velocity as they move over onto the Joseph Street site, that's going to open up a greater demand for transportation, for cycling infrastructure transportation, as more and more students make their way downtown from campus.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Alex. That's all from committee. Just a quick reminder to committee, please just keep questions to questions of clarification. Okay, our next delegation is Tyler Ulmer.
Hello. So thanks for having me on. I'm speaking on behalf of Momentum Developments today. So we're definitely very in support of this proposal from a few different reasons. Firstly, on a personal level, I'm a triathlete, so I spend a lot of time biking, and it just seems like every time you get out on the bike, you have at least one close call, which kind of adds up. And towards the end of the summer, I know me and a lot of the other triathletes in the area just end up doing all our training indoors, which is really unfortunate, especially when we only have a Canadian summer, and then we're stuck indoors all winter as well. So the separated bike lanes definitely makes a big difference for that. Just keeping cars out of the bike lanes, keeping cars from pulling over into the bike lanes. But then sort of more from the developer perspective, and in my opinion, and sort of the accepted academic opinion as well, is that a city sort of lives and dies based on its ability for people to get around not driving. If you look at any city that's considered a great city or the top cities in the world, people aren't driving around. And I think it's very important to accept that. And in North America, we're a few steps behind on that. We still have a lot of reliance on the car. So getting these bike lanes is very important. And it helps the entire health of the city. And it's about kind of changing the culture of the city as well. There's always going to be a big percentage of people that don't want to bike. But when you sort of implement these bike lanes and you have people biking, it sort of changes that culture, and people will be willing to take other modes of transportation behind the car when it sort of builds up. And then obviously just not having cars is or reducing the cars or increasing biking is just great for the overall health, less accidents, less pollution, that sort of thing. And this also another important thing that I haven't seen brought up yet is the new zoning bylaw. So the Crosby zoning bylaw allows buildings in the core to have to be built with no parking, which is great for a number of reasons. But in order for that to sort of work the way I think we all want it to, there definitely needs to be a focus on other methods of transportation, and biking being the really obvious one. But yeah, so reducing the parking, like this will help with housing affordability as well. I know on the developer side, we don't make money building parking, even if we're selling the spots at $40,000 or $45,000 each. It's definitely a loss to have to build parking. So this not having to build it or having to build a significantly reduced amount of it definitely helps affordability, because the rest of the units don't need to absorb that loss in revenue. It'll help the look of our buildings as well a lot. I don't think there's anyone that's a fan of above grade parking structures. From an architectural perspective, they're pretty brutal. So getting rid of those is pretty good. And then also just the reduction in construction materials. We have a project right now that I'll try not to leak anything, but we're sort of recycling an existing parking structure. And because of that, we're saving thousands of tons of CO2 emissions, which is something I'm really proud of. My background is in sustainable energy engineering. So to be able to do that is very important to me. And increasing the bike lanes and being able to reduce parking counts just definitely helps that. And then sort of the last point as well is with these bike lanes is reducing surface parking. Surface parking also, I think, just it looks bad. It kind of kills the city. It kills the feel of the city, and it eats up a lot of space that could be developed or could be green space or anything like that. So that's all I really have. Momentum's definitely in support of this.
Thanks, Tyler. Appreciate your comments. We have no further questions of clarification. Our next delegation is Brian Doucette. Welcome, Brian.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for allowing me to speak here this morning. I'm going to speak about something that in some ways is a bit boring, or maybe we should use the word, let's talk about ordinary. I'm the Canada Research Chair in Urban Change and Social Inclusion at the University of Waterloo School of Planning. I was also on the Cycling and Trails Master Plan Advisory Committee that Darren spoke about earlier. Some of you who know me know that I lived in the Netherlands for many years. And when I lived there, I rode a bike everywhere. And to be honest, never really thought about it. It was only really moving back to Canada in 2017 that I became a cyclist. If we think about bike lanes, they're not just built for people who are quote unquote cyclists. As some of the other delegates have talked about today, good quality cycling infrastructure enables people to cycle, people who never would consider cycling before that infrastructure was in place. When I lived in the Netherlands, I met many people who moved there for a few years and they cycled every day. And then when they moved back to their home countries, wherever it was around the world, they never picked up a bike again. None of those people at any stage of their lives would have considered themselves to be a quote unquote cyclist. Here in Canada, we talk a lot about drivers versus cyclists. It's very combative, right? You're a driver or you're a cyclist. Good quality cycling infrastructure, good quality road infrastructure blurs that division. Rather than a cyclist taking the lane aggressively in order to carve out a small piece of road space for themselves, with good quality infrastructure like what's being proposed here, we have people using bikes to get around their city safely and enjoyably. So fundamentally, this is about choice, right? This is about enabling more journeys to be done by more people in different ways. It's not per se about the cyclists who are cycling out there today. It's about the people who never would consider cycling. And again, we've heard some discussions about places that people can't go by bike, even if they ride bikes elsewhere. So it's about enabling people who either don't cycle now or who don't cycle to certain places now. When cycling becomes safe, convenient, enjoyable, it becomes ordinary. It becomes boring in a sense. It also becomes safer. Good quality infrastructure designs conflict out of the road system. And this is fundamentally what Vision Zero is about. It's not mainly about better signage or driver education or more enforcement. It's about changing the road system to create safe spaces for all users. Designing conflict out of the road system actually benefits drivers as well. So the Netherlands, as many of you know, is a cycling paradise, right? It also regularly ranks as the #1 country in the world for driver satisfaction. Why? Well, there's a variety of reasons, not least of which because that conflict between other road users is designed out of the system. Increasingly, cities across Canada are paying note. Vancouver, Toronto, Montreal, Calgary, Hamilton, among others, are all seeing cycling become more ordinary in certain parts of their cities, not through paint, right? That picture that came up from Sam's presentation perfectly captures all the pitfalls of paint. So cycling becomes ordinary, not through paint, but through separated and protected infrastructure. And again, I think of a friend of mine in Toronto who lives in the east end of the city, not a cyclist, never cycled in his adult life. And now with these protected bike lanes on the Danforth is calling me and saying, hey, how can you help me get a good bike? So I'm going to cycle to my work on the other side of the city. Why? Because it's convenient, because it's now safe and probably quicker than driving. So to round off, I do want to stress 2 points that are maybe a little bit broader than what you're voting on today, but I think are also important to remember as we talk about urban space. The first is that experiences of urban space, also when riding a bike, are determined by many factors, including our age, our gender, our class, our sexual orientation, and our race. And that making cycling safe and convenient and enjoyable for all, yes, infrastructure is an essential first step. But we also have to look at some of the discrimination that goes on in our cities and our societies and how that's reflected in public space. The second is that if we're talking about building an equitable city, the downtown cycling grid is really just a start. This type of infrastructure needs to be ubiquitous across the city. Downtown Kitchener is gentrifying rapidly and is losing a lot of its options for low-income residents who will end up and are ending up being pushed out further away from the downtown core. Therefore, we need to ensure that these mobility choices that I've spoke of today become common, ordinary, and yes, boring parts of the entire city, regardless of where people live. So it's great that we've got this as a first step. I hope you approve it. But I think we also need to think about subsequent steps of how we can make this a normal part of the entire city of Kitchener. Thank you very much for your time. So a lot of my talk today is based on a lot of really important academic research, some of which I've summarized in an article that was published in Conversation last month. If you'd like to find out more or read some of those sources, I invite you to look at that. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Brian. Thanks a lot for your presentation. We have no questions for you.
Thank you.
Our next delegation is Dawn Parker. Welcome, Dawn.
Hey, great to see you guys. I'm having the pleasure today not only to see all of you again, but to report on research that was conducted by myself and Brian Doucette, as well as postdoc Yu Huang, master's student Devin Fang, and PhD student Emma McDougall. And Darren approached us wanting to address resident concerns that new cycling infrastructure might reduce property values. So Brian and I designed with the students a mixed method study. I can have, if you don't have that full report, we can get it to Diana. I didn't want to tempt fate and having slides, but basically Brian and Emma did qualitative interviews with realtors and developers, and myself, Yu Huang, and Devin Fang did a quantitative study using what we believe to be state-of-the-art methods to look at this question of whether or not cycling infrastructure has an impact on property values. And we want to thank MPAC and Terranet. This was done through a collaborative research agreement. So we're using data from 2013 to 2018, which also allowed us to incorporate tree data and some better transit accessibility metrics. We want to caution you that these models do not say anything about causality. They show correlations between neighborhood and structural features and sales prices. I'm an environmental and resource economist. No decision should be based purely on economic values, nor should it be based on the narrow private values that these transactions reflect. Again, we used data from 2013 to 2018 and looked at associations between being within 100 meters, between 200 and 100 meters, and being between 400 and 200 meters from on-road bike lanes, separated bike lanes, of which we have very few in the study, and multi-use trails. And we looked at these for single-family residential, excluding townhomes, and for condos separately. So there are some limitations in that we don't have road volumes or street width, and we don't have data on on-street parking. So some interesting points, although Brian and Emma's study showed that developers and realtors perceived that cycling values might be higher in the suburbs, which would be more of an amenity and recreational use, we found no differences in the values for these infrastructures between the core area and the suburbs. For condos, we found that on-road bike lanes and multi-use trail proximity were associated with higher values between 3.6 to 7.7%. We found your classic spurious correlation with some negative values for the separated bike lanes. That is because the infrastructure that we have currently, as you saw from Darren's new infrastructure filling all of downtown, this is mainly the King Street underpass and the Weber Street separated bike lanes, and then environments like Ottawa Street. For residential, there were basically no impacts or associations with any cycling infrastructure except for some very weak positive infrastructure with the multi-use trails. So we also found positive values for street trees and street canopies. I understand there's now a new street layer, but we hope that this will be taken into consideration not only for developers, but also when you're building this infrastructure, perhaps there's the possibility of trees in those boulevards. So we have the whole report. We can bring it to your hands if you're interested, along with some overview PowerPoint slides. We hope certainly this recommendation will alleviate concerns of residents and provide more evidence-based decision-making. In the downtown core, mostly we have condos. This research does demonstrate that there are positive associations between cycling infrastructure and condos for many reasons. We also indicate in all of my research in the Urban Growth and Change Research Group, there are very strong values for walkability, both from renters and from sales transactions, also from discussions with developers and realtors. So downtown Kitchener is relatively walkable. This is going to improve walkability and safety quite significantly by reducing the number of traffic lanes and providing that separation between the pedestrian and the cyclist. And we know that there are very contentious interactions between pedestrians and cyclists. This will allow the two to be separated, and whatever hat you're wearing will have a positive interaction with others using other modes of transportation. Brian spoke about affordable housing leaving the core. There's still a lot, and our research in the past, Jason Neudorf in 2014, found that non-automobile accessibility to employment was highest in the core. We need to continue to support those people. Sarah and I live near the Spurline Trail. That's obviously used by residents of all kinds of income levels to improve their accessibility. I also just want to say, from a personal perspective, I do ride my bike to Uptown Waterloo since the new lanes are there. I've never ridden my bike to downtown Kitchener, not even to meet with you guys. This is going to let me ride seamlessly and safely from my neighborhood to the Kitchener market. And I will do that, especially because the 7 bus route has been reduced. I think you'll see many more families doing that. And I have the privilege to travel to Europe. I come home from being in a beautiful German small town with an amazing train station, you know, and you exit and you see all of these people walking and biking to your destination. You come home and you think, why can't we be like this? This is visionary. When you combine this with the new transit terminal, which we heard about last week, it will transform our downtown. It'll make us a place to be envied and a place to be more loved and more inspired by taking that big transition to real walkability, real cycling support, and a European style downtown. So again, I'm happy to answer any other questions about the report, as would be Brian. If any of you want to follow up, we'll make sure you get that report if Darren hasn't already done so. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Dawn. We do have a question of clarification for you. Councillor Marsh.
Thank you. Thank you, Dawn, for your presentation. Can you clarify what is the geographic area that your study was conducted in?
Thank you, Sarah. This was conducted for all of Kitchener. So that includes the suburbs. It includes all of the infrastructure time coded that the city was able to give us. But it is only until 2018. So there have obviously been some real improvements. I'm thinking of Queen Street in the cycling infrastructure that wouldn't be reflected in this study. But it does look at, we also defined our core area. This was a nice idea that Brian had as everything 1945 and earlier. And then we separately controlled for everything within 800 meters of the LRT line.
Great. Okay. Thank you very much. I do look forward to seeing that study. It hasn't crossed my mailbox yet, so hopefully we can get that from Darren soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dawn. And our next delegation is Michael Clark.
Good morning.
Welcome, Michael.
Let me first begin by thanking you for letting me speak today. I'm here representing the City of Kitchener's Cycling and Trails Advisory Committee. This advisory committee is at the end of its term, and we have spent that term watching the cycling infrastructure in this city grow piece by piece, while at the same time waiting with anticipation to start the work on the Cycling and Trails Master Plan. The matter before us today, the separated downtown cycling grid, is the first step in making that master plan a reality and is a transformative acceleration of equitable infrastructure in our city. At our last meeting, the advisory committee was presented with the plans for this downtown grid and have been updated with its changes since. We viewed the routes and discussed options along them, but in the end, we're satisfied with the work that city staff have done. Our committee passed a unanimous motion of support for this project. We did so because we recognize the value that it will bring to our community. This protected grid is designed to attract all ages and abilities of cyclists who want to cycle more, but don't feel comfortable cycling in downtown under the current conditions. We also recognized that after 2 years of observing the limitations of piecemeal improvements, the social and economic value of undertaking this scale of project all at once. With a network of this design, the positive effects for all road users will be immediate. Everyone will be secure in their own space, able to safely transverse to and through the downtown, increasing access to the businesses and amenities of downtown and to the neighborhoods surrounding it. This grid will also be the keystone in future developments that will create a safe and secure network of routes from one side of the city to the other. It is important to note that the routes included in this grid were already approved by council, as they were specifically identified in the master plan, which received broad public consultation and which council studied and passed. These routes were chosen carefully and specifically to maximize effect while minimizing impact. If there is discussion remaining, we believe it is to the facility type that should be implemented along these routes. And to that, we would stress the identification of this proposal: separated downtown cycling grid. It was the feeling of the Cycling and Trails Advisory Committee that the separation is a vital, intrinsic part of this project. Separated, protected facilities are the safest for all road users. As Darren mentioned, the city's own strategic plan calls for a continuous and protected network of this kind. To put in the work now in this way will ensure the greatest productivity, longevity, and efficiency to the taxpayer. Kitchener has an opportunity here, not just to emulate what has been done by others, but to be the one others point to as an example of progressive, empathetic, citizen-focused infrastructure. This downtown grid is needed, necessary, and supported by us, your Cycling and Trails Advisory Committee. And as a personal aside, I just want to tell the council an anecdote. In the summertime, I live downtown, and I was walking around one evening, and in the parking lot for St. Mary's, just behind the City Hall Ion stop, there was someone about my age, mid-30s, learning to ride a bicycle for the first time. And I knew that they were learning to ride a bicycle for the first time because there was a person our age holding onto the back of their seat, jogging along behind them to make sure that they didn't fall over. And given the proximity, I can only assume that they live in the condo building directly across the street. There are an increasing number of condo buildings in downtown, and there are going to be an increasing number of people who are living in them who don't have other means of transportation. And cycling is cheap and it is easy. And we need to have the infrastructure in place, not for seasoned veterans, but for children and for people who are getting on a bike for the first time in 25 years. And so on behalf of both myself and the Cycling and Trails Advisory Committee, I thank you for your time today.
Thanks, Michael. We don't have any questions for you. Our next delegation is Stephen Trim.
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me all right?
We sure can. Welcome.
Thank you. You'll have to excuse the bar in the background. It's I'm stuck in the dining room area with some housemates. Yeah, so everyone's spoken a lot today, and I don't want to be too redundant. I'm over on Hines Avenue by Victoria Park. Been here for a couple of years. I was actually initially looking at buying in the space with a friend on a shared mortgage, which was very progressive of us, as you can imagine. But the one thing that we've realized partly is it's the cost of living downtown, even for somebody like I'm in design and marketing. I work with tech, I work with nonprofits, but I work with a lot of small businesses as well. And just the cost of living is tight, even being downtown as a young professional. And I'm 28 now. I just got my first car. I don't really use it. And the main reason I got it was because seeking groceries, running errands, and getting around town, east, west, and downtown core is just, very, very difficult, I find. I mean, everyone's talked about, we've got the Iron Horse and we've got the different trails. But I just didn't feel safe riding with groceries, going through the downtown core, even going down to like Full Circle Foods across to Frederick to visit friends. And I think the one thing that we kind of, I guess we've talked about a lot today, and I just want to hit on this one more time, is that there is value in making the everyday person's life that could take the car, take the bike, like there's no question that a biking trail and a bike path is necessary. Obviously in our area, there's a little bit of concern about traffic and congestion and, you know, excess cars coming down it. And I think we're mindful of that, and I'm mindful of that, but I still am supportive of the path because I know how much value it can bring in the long term to people like myself and younger for that matter. And the affordability, I don't think you have to be, I think this idea of affordability and socio divide, like you don't have to be making less than $20,000 to need a bike to get around, you know. I make $40,000, $50,000 a year on my own business, and affording a car can be tight on that. And I think for a lot of like people coming out of school from my master's and paying off student debt, like a bike's the best option you have in being able to move around. And I just wanted to ground that story because I think it gets talked a lot about, but you don't really often talk to people that actually have to do that. But I happen to be one of those people. And, you know, some of you, I recognize some of you, I worked with the Mike Morris Green Party campaign in the last election, which was a bit of a stretch for me because before that I worked with the Liberals and before that I had voted Conservative. And so I think I'm always about what the progression is and what's needed for a city, and it doesn't have to be divisive and a political motivation. And I know at the local level, we're less party oriented, and it seems it's more neighborhood divided. But I still think there's huge value in what is being put forward. And you know, as far as the dividers versus the non-dividers, obviously one is more safe than the other, and there's concerns about traffic flow. I would default to what's safer and more likely to encourage people to want to get on a bike and feel comfortable running their errands than anything else. And I think I'll leave it at that because I'm really not that interesting.
Yourself short on that. And we don't have any questions for you, so thank you for your presentation, Stephen. Next up is David Truman. Welcome, David.
Good morning. Thank you all for the opportunity to be heard. I'm just going to get out of full screen here so that I can read my speaking notes. So I'm David Truman. I'm the interim chair of Cycle WR. If I may say, we were recently awarded the best organization at the Ontario Bike Summit. Cycle WR advocates for cycling to be safe, respected, and convenient mode of transportation for people of all ages and abilities. In achieving this goal, the benefits to our community are enormous. Meeting the transportation needs of those who cannot afford a car, helping to meet committed climate change targets, and an amazing 40% reduction in chronic disease risk for those who cycle, along with huge public benefit cost savings for those who don't. A more livable, vibrant community, and more spending at local businesses. Cycle WR participated in the design consultations for the grid. And if I could have slide 3. I applaud Council for your approval of the Cycling and Trails Master Plan. The #1 short-term initiative in that plan was the downtown cycling grid. Your staff have put together an amazing transformative plan to make the downtown core safer and more accessible for people of all ages and abilities. It is connected and comprehensive. We know of people living in Midtown who previously shopped in Uptown Waterloo who will be able to shift their buying to downtown Kitchener when this is implemented. Personally, I will feel safe when I visit my favorite destinations: Full Circle Foods, Communitech, Blaro, Matter of Taste, the library, and the art gallery, to just a few. Next slide, please. The designs put forward by staff are of highest standards, such as those advocated by NACTO, National Association of City Transport Officials. Kitchener can reap the benefits as forward in their words: improve traffic safety, improve air quality and public health, provide better and more equitable access to jobs and opportunities and bolster local economies. It's called a grid network for a reason. I urge you not to second guess staff. They have carefully put together a grid that works well in its entirety, and there's been an enormous amount of public consultation to arrive at it. They have already made compromises in the design in response to feedback. The value of the network as a whole is far, far greater than the sum of the parts. If you nickel and dime the approach, you will diminish the overall value disproportionately. Next slide, number 6. In terms of need, I remind you that we don't assess the need for a bridge by counting the number of people swimming across the river. This will open up possibilities for reaching destinations throughout downtown, and of course for crossing the downtown. As one of the previous speakers pointed out, they couldn't get to the east side. I applaud you and former Kitchener and regional councils on visionary thinking and action that has put Kitchener on an exciting trajectory. The downtown cycling grid is another visionary move. Please approve it in its entirety. And thank you very much.
Thanks, David. We don't have any questions for you. Our next delegation is Sue Coulter.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak. I'll just put my video on. That would help. There we go. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to the proposed downtown cycling grid. I'm addressing the proposed permanent changes to Joseph Street, and I've really appreciated listening to all of the previous speakers. Like many of my neighbors, I am a pedestrian, a cyclist, and I drive a car. I live close to downtown Kitchener on Water Street South, adjacent to Victoria Park. A healthy, greener city is important to me, and I therefore support efforts that achieve that, including creating a safe cycling network and mitigating motor vehicle congestion. I completed the survey, participated in the information meetings held by city staff, and a more recent neighborhood meeting arranged by Councillor Chapman. Throughout the discussions, a paragraph in the city survey that described the strategy that Darren talked about, called Neighborhood Bikeways, has stayed with me. It reads, neighborhood bikeways are quiet local streets that can be enjoyed in a low-stress environment without designated space. Bicycles are assigned priority by applying additional speed and volume treatments to motor vehicles to reduce the level of stress for cyclists. Our downtown heritage neighborhood with narrow streets close to Victoria Park has the potential to fit that description. It is a socioeconomically diverse and friendly neighborhood. Visitors to the park from all over the city and elsewhere regularly walk the streets, pedestrians of all ages, families with strollers, children on bikes and scooters, and lots of dogs have created the kind of neighborhood which the city fosters through the Love Your Hood initiatives. Cyclists, however, primarily use the pleasant trails and the path through the common to connect with downtown. There are also some brave cyclists who commute using Jubilee Drive. The proposal to make Joseph Street one-way and install permanent bike lanes is concerning for a few reasons. First of all, Joseph Street is wider than side streets, is very busy, and is a necessary main thoroughfare. And during our most recent meeting, we were not surprised when staff acknowledged that making it one way would add yet more traffic to narrow side streets. As Tyler mentioned earlier, living on Heights, our small neighborhood has been under duress from gradually increasing vehicle traffic. And the welcome addition of the tannery perhaps brought more vehicle commuters and fewer cycling commuters than had been hoped. And each of the developments downtown have increased commuter traffic and the impact of the yet-to-be-built University of Waterloo Medical Research Facility, again close to Joseph at Victoria, is unknown. Also, during our most recent meeting, concern was raised by both staff and residents about the impact of thousands of vehicles traveling on Jubilee Drive every weekday, as well as the accompanying congestion on side streets. Like any of us who drive, these commuters seek the fastest, most efficient route, resulting in frustrated drivers finding shortcuts on the narrow neighboring streets. Speeding and backed up traffic jeopardizes emergency vehicle routes as well as pedestrian safety. Over the years, we have observed that any traffic disruption has an immediate negative impact on the neighborhood. The recent closure of Victoria Street South dramatically demonstrated this with an unmanageable volume of traffic. And we saw children not playing on sidewalks or on front lawns. Regular pedestrians disappeared and residents retreated inside. So while such a significant disruption is not a regular occurrence, it did highlight the vulnerability of the neighborhood. Making Joseph Street one way would only add to this. Given the challenging budget discussions ahead of you, I wonder if it would seem prudent to defer this expensive permanent portion of the proposed $5.9 million capital cost of the grid and the annual operational cost of $80,000 per kilometer. And that would allow staff an opportunity to work with residents regarding traffic management, particularly on Jubilee Drive, and implement some of the less intrusive and less expensive speed and volume treatments described in the city survey. Our downtown heritage community, close to an urban park, already popular with cyclists, would seem an ideal place to implement a neighborhood bikeway strategy before considering such a permanent solution. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Sue. We don't have any questions from, oh, we do have one question. Councillor Marsh.
Thanks, Councillor Ioannidis, or Chair Ioannidis. Thank you, Sue, for your presentation. Are you, just to clarify, are you suggesting that not only Water Street be a bikeway, a neighborhood bikeway, but that Joseph Street be a neighborhood bikeway?
I think what I'm suggesting is that there are less, the way that I understand the description of the neighborhood bikeway would make the whole neighborhood a more friendly transit. And so rather than taking what is already a chaotic traffic situation and then adding to that by making Joseph one way before trying the less intrusive and less expensive methods, I just wonder if that might not be, I guess that's what it is that I'm suggesting, because we don't see lots of cyclists on our streets. We see lots and lots of pedestrians, but not so many cyclists. And it would seem that this would be an ideal neighborhood that could be made bike friendly, that bike traffic could then get through without the necessity of making Joseph one way.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Sue. We have no further questions for you.
Thank you.
Thanks for your presentation. Up next, we have Mike Bowes. Welcome, Mike. We're not hearing you, Mike. I'm not sure if you have your.
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you now.
Okay, sorry about that. Thank you. Good morning. As past member and chair of the Cycling and Trails Advisory Committee several years ago, it was a source of personal frustration how the implementation of the former Cycling and Trails master plans seemed to be doled out in tiny, disconnected pieces. There was a way of managing these capital projects that felt deeply ingrained and institutionalized in Kitchener that we on the committee thought was impossible to overcome. The outcome of this former approach led to frequent conflicts with vested interests along these potential cycling infrastructure fragments, as it was harder to explain the value of the fragment in the absence of the network of the whole to which that fragment might someday belong. It often led to compromises to the safety in the designs, because being forced to stand on their own, safer designs that spilled out into other unsafe roads seemed hard to justify. I'll be frank that these continuous conflicts over small, compromised fragments burned out some of our great volunteers. That's why I'm so pleased to see the strategic, network-oriented approach staff, council, and the volunteers on today's advisory committee have taken with the new Cycling and Trails Master Plan, and especially with its first major initiative, the Protected Downtown Cycling Grid. I think city staff should be commended for the thought, effort, and community listening that have gone into the recommendation before you today. As a result, we have a strong plan that enables the city to make meaningful and measurable progress towards its sustainable and equitable strategic goals. And this plan has strong community support because we can see how the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. I want to focus my comments on the two primary east-west corridors in the proposed grid, or two of them at least. The first, along Joseph Street, I believe to be of critical importance to enabling the multimodal nature of the Central Transit Hub and our Innovation District. Victoria Street and the part of King Street with which it intersects are not particularly cycling friendly. By linking to the Iron Horse to Transit Hub Trail, Joseph provides a vital cycling link between the hub and the rest of downtown. The second, I must confess, is of interest to my personal safety. When not in a global pandemic, I bike daily along Duke to my workplace in the Brydup block. My commute has been greatly eased by the contraflow bike lane on Duke Street East, and it's surprisingly decent winter maintenance. However, there are two pain points that I risk when traveling westbound beyond this section of Duke, at Frederick and Francis, where the ion tracks cross the road. Angled track crossings are dangerous when cycling, as your tires can get stuck in the tracks and propel you into traffic. To avoid this, it's recommended to try and cross tracks as perpendicularly as possible. To do so at Frederick and Francis requires weaving towards the middle or even the left side of the lane, which can put me in the path of confused motorists behind me. I've got a lot of experience and confidence in cycling, and I find this whole thing uncomfortable. Imagine what it's like for someone who's just learning to bike or trying out cycling again for the first time in years. The proposed grid route, with the region's cooperation, will put all crossings on the south side of Duke, where the angle of attack is favorable and crossing tracks is safe. Again, allow me to reiterate how thrilled I am to see such a strategic project come forward in this way. It's going to have a big impact on how we and our neighbors can get to and around downtown. I'm looking forward to exploring the grid with my 7-year-old, who just mastered the bike this past spring. I urge you all to wholeheartedly approve it today. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. We don't have any further questions for you. Our next delegation is Kathy Storing. Welcome, Kathy.
Hello. I'm a resident of Hines Avenue, and I'm a longtime cyclist. Over the years, I've cycled trails and streets in a variety of cities. So I get the passion for cycling, and I applaud the city for all of the initiatives they've done over the years. But I do have questions, and I have to say, after listening to all these various delegations today, I feel like I'm questioning the value of cute puppies. However, the questions that I've had since we were first introduced to this initiative are echoed by some of my neighbors who are the young urban professionals that we welcome downtown. And I think the biggest thing that for us was that we live downtown. We live right beside Joseph Street, and we're in and out around downtown all the time. And we see very few cyclists on our downtown streets. In winter, they're rare. So our first thoughts were around, why is this happening? I'm going to cut to the chase because you guys have been listening to a lot of stuff today. So here are some of the things that we talked about. Number one is the price. $5.9 million just for cycling is very, very rich at a time when governments of all levels are trying to deal with unprecedented costs. We don't know what the fallout is going to be in the years to come. So is this separated cycling lanes with introduction of various one-way streets. Is that really the key need for the future of downtown Kitchener? I would like to see this not killed. I think any kind of cycling initiatives are wonderful, but I would like this particular thing just delayed a little bit to answer some very, very specific questions. First one would be winter research. I would like to see evidence that the number of daily cyclists will justify the permanent nature of the infrastructure and the ongoing costs. The ongoing costs are $80,000 per kilometer per year. I'd like to see weekend research in the summer. Excuse me. When our summer festivals resume, how will one-way streets, restricted traffic flows right along the park affect the thousands of people who pour into our neighborhood? I'm sorry, many are by car, for events like Rib Fest and Blues Fest and Multicultural Festival. I don't think that's been looked at. I'd like to see a targeted study of Jubilee Drive. This came up again and again in our neighborhood discussions. Jubilee has become crazy busy with traffic. How can the city be sure that displacing traffic off Joseph isn't going to cause further distress on Jubilee? Maybe we should be solving Jubilee before we move ahead with this grid. Manulife has apparently floated the idea of a grocery store in its empty parking lot on Joseph. A downtown grocery store has been talked about for ages. Access into that lot is already prohibited because of the LRT tracks on Charles. Would a grocery store still be considered if we're now introducing restricted traffic flow on Joseph? How would the delivery trucks and yes, the shoppers who arrive by car get in and out efficiently? In closing, like Sue Coulter before me, I would love to see the less intrusive elements of your cycling plan move ahead quickly. I think they're wonderful, but I would really ask that the permanent lanes and the one-way structure be held off for further research. There is no rush. People can still cycle in the meantime. Let's just make sure we've got it right. Thank you.
Thanks, Kathy. We do have one question for you for clarification. Councillor Marsh.
Thanks, Kathy, for your perspective today. I wonder, do you think that if drivers were to have on their apps, their Google Maps or whatever they use, whether it's Wave or any other Waves or any other app, that if we were to have data be able to help drive people not to Jubilee Drive, but to more efficient ways of getting around Victoria Park, what do you think that might help?
It may well help, but it's the kind of thing that I think has to be tested first. I really don't like the idea of let's just put it in and then let the neighbors ask these questions later. I think we've got some key questions that have not been answered right now. We've got great traffic studies and great talk about tech workers and that kind of thing, but we already have a lot of tech workers and we have a lot of condo dwellers downtown. We're not seeing that uptick in cycling right now. That means that this has to be urgently put through. I think there's a bit of time to just step back, look at Jubilee, look at the festivals in particular, and just kind of stop and assess those on the ground elements.
Mm-hmm. Thanks. Something you said at the top of your presentation kind of confused me. It's not really your main points, but you said something about you're questioning the cuteness of puppies. Can you tell me what do you mean?
Well, just that a lot of these presentations have been amazing. They're about the overall value of cycling. I fully agree, fully applaud it. I know that there are cities that do an amazing job of this, and I'm all for cycling initiatives. But
okay.
I am concerned about Joseph. And I have to say, I've got to say this now that I've got the opportunity. The neighborhood was blindsided or felt blindsided. I know the city did a lot of consultation, but we were not consulted until it was already pretty well a done deal. Yes, there were changes made, but it was after everything was in place. I think if we'd been consulted early, people might have had some suggestions and we might have been able to clear up some of the issues. So
Mhm.
that's kind of what's made the neighborhood kind of start a discussion group and all that kind of thing. We are not against cycling at all, but
Okay.
we were taken off guard by something that directly affects our street. It's great for cyclists who might come into the neighborhood occasionally, but our street is affected every day. So we'd like to talk about it further.
Thank you very much for offering your perspective. I really appreciate it.
Yeah.
Okay, we have no further questions for you, Kathy, so thank you for your presentation. Up next is Kate Dudak. Welcome, Kate, and
Hi.
helper.
Yeah, that's my daughter Isla. My name's Kate Dudek. And I also have a 5-year-old and a 2-year-old, and our family also has a dad, my husband Pete. We live in the Central Frederick neighborhood in Ward 10, and we'd like you to support this proposal. We're here to just talk about us and why this matters to our family. In 2013, we moved from Wilmette Township to the downtown area of Kitchener specifically so that my family could bike for transportation. There were too many close passes from gravel trucks when I was biking in from Baden, and we intentionally wanted to live somewhere where we could get around without a car as much as possible. We've been even able to go down from being a 2-car family to having only 1 car that we don't drive very often. My husband bikes to work at the corner of Victoria and Joseph from our home on Lancaster Street East, but not the part that will be a neighborhood bikeway. The kids and I regularly bike to do grocery pickups at Value Mart, Superstore, Fiddleheads, and Full Circle. We bike to our dentist on Union Street, the University of Waterloo Optometry Clinic, and in non-pandemic times, we're regulars at Mill Courtland Community Center, the Downtown Community Center, and the Brideup Community Center. We also love biking to summer festivals in Victoria Park, and we make use of the Kitchener Bike Check program. We regularly stop for quick meals or ice cream and make spontaneous small purchases, and we appreciate safe routes and plentiful bike parking. My older 2 children, 5 and 9, can ride their own bikes, and they have been riding with me on the road from a young age. They're seasoned veterans in a sense, not because they chose to be, but because they have to be for us to travel by bike on roads. We mostly have brilliant, amazing experiences biking in Kitchener and Waterloo region, which is why we keep doing it. And we've also have had several experiences that are not for the faint of heart. We've had aggressive drivers shout and honk at us for taking the lane on roads where there's no dedicated bike infrastructure. We've had close passes, even when there's room to fully change lanes. We've had cars parked and stopped on top of painted bike lanes, which forces us into traffic. And we've had our bikes vandalized while parked downtown. And sometimes it's just scarier on the road, even when we're not the only ones on, or even when we're the only ones on it. My daughter still remembers a ride about 3 years ago when we were riding northbound on Margaret Avenue near Queen Street to connect to the spur line on a windy day. Do you want to tell that part? Okay. As we passed the tall apartment buildings there was a huge gust of wind that almost blew her over, and she almost crashed into a parked car. She's still scared when she rides along that part of Margaret and will appreciate the intended multi-use path. We also often get cut off at intersections by drivers, even when we have the right of way. I was really glad to see that the post-survey report for this project identified protection at intersections to be an additional consideration. In a few years, Isla will feel comfortable and ready to venture out on her own by bike to visit friends, go to classes, and maybe even run short errands for us. This project, especially the concrete medians instead of paint and flex posts, makes it a realistic possibility that my husband and I will feel comfortable encouraging her to do that. The protected downtown cycling grid plan is a good one, and other cities all over the world have been making their downtown cores more vibrant and accessible as well by adding safe cycling networks and saving money doing it. In fact, an article in the Ottawa Citizen on May 5th of 2017 explained that developers there found that bike lanes built on a bed designed for lighter pedestrian specifications are plenty durable for bikes, and they save $41 per meter in implementation compared to lanes designed for heavy cars. This is a big deal, and it's something to keep in mind as we move forward. There are some other families that I know that are like us. They bike for transportation and want to get places safely. Many, many more families have told me that I'm brave and that they are too scared to do what we do. So they pile into the minivan to drive 5 blocks to school or to the library. This updated infrastructure changes lives though. My husband's 70-year-old coworker got a pedal assist bike this past summer and started riding regularly for the first time ever. He even was working on a route to bike from his home in Cambridge to his job at the tannery while the COVID lanes were in place. Our whole family is very excited to see this project underway. And hey, if you feel like delaying some road expansion projects so you can speed up the timeline, we wouldn't mind that either. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Kate. Yeah, we don't have any other further questions. And thank you very much for your presentation. Up next, we have Mike Maurice. Welcome, Mike.
Thank you. Good morning. Nice to see you all. For the public record, I live in Ward 9 in Cherry Park. I primarily get around by bike, on foot, and by public transit. And I'm the founder of Sustainable Waterloo Region and a co-founder of Climate Action WR. I'm here this morning to share that I'm strongly supportive of this plan, primarily for the same reasons as you've already heard from Tavis, Don, Brian, and many other delegates this morning, because good quality cycling infrastructure enables safer mobility for all road users, and it will increase the number of people open to cycling across the city. I just want to share 3 points to highlight some of what I see as key aspects from the staff report. The first is that this is just good economics for our downtown. There was a wonderful study cited in the report that I wanted to call your attention to. Uptown Waterloo shoppers are finding, or their study found 70% of shoppers travel by bike, walking, or public transit. And that the quote from the report is that cyclists make more frequent shopping trips than those arriving by car and spend at least as much overall as those who drive to shop. They go on to note that cyclists often have more disposable income as a result of not having car payments, insurance, gas, and all the rest. The second point is that I see this as really important local climate action, given the fact that we're in a climate emergency and that we know that 49% of our emissions come from transportation. In that case, building a few kilometers of bike lanes seems like a no-brainer. Third point is this also seems to me like a pretty balanced approach. The report points out that even in the grid, 55% of the road space remains for cars. And that from a parking point of view, I thought they did a really nice job. Yes, there's 24 spaces lost. They're also adding 10 more, adding signage to 15 that are underutilized on Bell Lane. Folks like Jordan at Legacy Green were listened to. And so I thought there was a pretty decent process to hear feedback over the past several months. Last point is I also want to remind that my understanding, at least, is even if this plan is approved, it isn't actually quite a full grid without the regional section of Duke between Water to Frederick, and requires, and so I appreciated the staff note that there's a requirement for more engagement and advocacy with the region to fill in that section as well. And I'm glad to see that staff are committed to doing that too. Thank you, and happy to answer any questions if there are any.
Thanks, Mike, for your presentation. We don't have any questions for you. Okay, and our next delegation is Dan Brotherston. Welcome, Dan.
Hello, thank you. Good morning, Council and Chair. I'm taking some time out of my morning to speak with you today to ask you to support the downtown cycling grid. I feel it is an important project for our city. Many people do not feel safe cycling on our roads, but a majority of them wish they could cycle more. This project would allow them to do so. I live on Joseph Street. Our building's driveway exits onto Joseph Street, but every day I watch out through my window as many cyclists ride by. In fact, according to the census, downtown Kitchener has a cycling rate at least 5 times higher than the city as a whole. Yet we know from a regional survey that only 6 to 7% of people feel comfortable riding on our road, but around 60% who want to cycle more do not feel safe. Just imagine how many people could cycle if there was safe infrastructure. And given that transportation is 50% of our greenhouse gas emissions, shifting our transportation choices is absolutely key to addressing the climate emergency we are facing. So please support the Downtown Cycling Grid project. You've heard from many other delegates why it's a good project and why it will allow more people to cycle and the features of it that provide that safety. I will say I was disappointed in how many places the project was compromised. I was especially frustrated with the removal of the Water Street cul-de-sac neighborhood bikeway treatment. I not only cycle, but I also enjoy walking in our city, and I walk in this area often. I was very much looking forward to having a safer environment to walk there as well. I cannot help but notice that this area has repeatedly had active transportation projects curtailed or canceled. Green sharrows that apparently clashed with the heritage of the neighborhood in a way that large modern SUVs apparently do not. Those were replaced with less noticeable black sharrows as an appeasement. The sidewalk that was proposed on Jubilee Drive, but for some reason too, was canceled because it threatened the heritage of the park. Again, in a way that the constant stream of speeding drivers does not. A stream of drivers that I must now deal with because there is no sidewalk where I often want to walk. And now this is a third active transportation project being compromised in this area. I'll simply say that I'm frustrated by that. I live here too, and my life is being made less pleasant and less safe by these decisions. So I urge you to support the Downtown Cycling Grid project without further compromises. Thank you.
Thanks, Dan. We don't have any further questions for you. Next delegation is Steve Burrows.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for listening today. I want to echo pretty much everything what everybody said today in terms of support. I support it. I support it for all the same reasons everybody else supports it. My concern is I'm just not sure that people are really fully appreciating what is being delivered. And I think that disjunct in terms of what's actually going to happen and what people think is going to happen is going to spell disaster. You know, I give it thumbs up just as Brian Baker did in the market. And, you know, I think also there's been a lot of progress in over the years, you know, starting as far back as constructing the expressway to get cars off of Charles and Duke. Those were initially one-way streets. The expressway took traffic off. Then they were able to be converted to two-way. And now, however many years later, we have a light rail transit on those streets. I mean, that's an incredible transformation of a one-way street to an active transit street. So that took decades. The other parts of, you know, what's happening is the sharrows, for instance. When that first arrived in the neighborhood, I'm in Victoria Park, I couldn't understand it. I wasn't approving of it. I didn't say anything because I just didn't understand it. It didn't seem like it was linked to a larger network. Then recently, the speed was reduced. And I thought, hey, that's it. This is part of a much bigger plan. This whole neighborhood is a cycling neighborhood. I live in the center of a cycling neighborhood. This is great. You know, potentially further reducing to 30. I don't think we'd have, you know, any arguments from the neighbors that would make that even safer. I'm not going to say that I'm not going to disapprove without showing another option. So I'm showing this. I don't know how many people can see it. You know, when you look at cities like Vancouver and places like that where they have good cycling grids, you can see how well this is all connected, right? And then you can see how this, which is the proposal, you know, nothing's connected. The existing connections remain. The existing connections are there, no change, but all these other areas are not included. So I don't see how that's being connected. One-way streets increase traffic, increase smog. So that's, you know, I don't think that that's a very environmentally friendly solution myself. What I've been hearing from the neighborhood associations, I don't represent them, but I have sat in and heard. And, you know, the large concern at VPNA is the Iron Horse Trail and the multi-use of the Iron Horse Trail. People cycling too quick, people walking, getting people's way of cycling too quick, who's allowed on the trail. You know, I think improving that trail would go a long way in terms of increasing people's ridership downtown. And another point actually I don't agree with is the notion that we don't have enough cyclists, you know, sorry neighbors, but when I look at Councillor Singh's photo, his previous one was literally from my deck. So I see a lot of cyclists go by there in the snow. Even just this past weekend I was watching, there'd be a cyclist every hour, going past the clock tower. So why are we not improving that connection? I think that's something that would really bolster cycling in the neighborhood. And, in order to do that, I think there's two blocks that we're currently seeing. The other concern from the VPNA was Jubilee, and I think you've heard that again today, is how do people get across Jubilee? You have a whole bunch of people come through Victoria Park to access the downtown, and currently they're stuck. They can't get across. So, I think we should do something more pedestrianized for Jubilee to allow people to get across. I think we should have timed lights. I think we should have a cycling lane that has its own button to push its own crosswalk. I think we should be adding cycling lanes through there as well. The other block is the connection from Victoria Park up to Gaukel, and I see something that could happen again, a pedestrianized connection. A couple of selfish things from us in the neighborhood. My neighbors' kids would have liked to have commented today. There's about a dozen kids in our street. They play basketball and stuff, but unfortunately they're in school. The kids are also at work. So unfortunate that this is the time this is being held. Personally, this is my sort of ask is when I come out of the park, it would be nice to have a sort of on-ramp to get me into that safe traffic. Because, one of the experiences I have coming out of the park is I'm on a sidewalk. I've actually come out of the Victoria Park onto a sidewalk and families get off the sidewalk to let me go. I get on the street because that's where I belong. And, but it's just odd that that's the mentality of people. And, I think we got to shift that a little bit. The other part of that is my neighbors' kids, I should say, would like to ask for a basketball court in the parking lot at the corner of Joseph and Jubilee as part of the active transit. Currently, the kids have nowhere to go. And it's an important thing, I think, if we're going to encourage active transit and active participation in our cities. The third note is directed at the study that was recently done. And in terms of the cost of condos. And so I'm looking at Dawn's report here on page 4. It's table 1. If we look at, Portland, Oregon, which is considered, one of the best cycling networks, and we look at the negative impacts of on-street cycling is 3 times greater than the positive of off-street. So if you think of all the cheering we do for Portland, for the positive impacts of their off-street cycling, the negative impacts of on-street are 3 times more negative. So take that into consideration when we're going to basically circle the downtown. Charlie West, people haven't even taken occupancy. That's triple reduction versus the positive. Manulife, City Hall's within there. What is that doing to people's property values? That's not my concern, in fact. What I would like to do, though, is thank Margaret because she's really bought. Actually, sorry. In addition to the one-way street, I'd like to understand. I'm not a planner. So what are the impacts of an economic and functional obsolescence with regard to a one-way street, and how does that impact the neighborhood? The other person I'd like to thank, though, is Margaret, and I don't represent Margaret's or comments or anything, but what she did do, she really brought this home for me. And pointing out that, when traffic's going to get diverted down Linden or David, depending which way the one-way street goes, that's going directly onto the streets of people who live in affordable housing. And that's going to have an impact on those people's lives, and Brian, you're talking about removing, the division. I mean, these are actually divisions. So it's putting a division in. You look at equitable and discrimination. And I think this kind of goes along those lines, to be honest. That's all I have to say.
Okay, Steve, we have no questions for you. Thank you for your presentation. Up next, and I do think is the last but not least, is Mario Chalansky. Welcome, Mario.
Just a Hi, thank you very much for this opportunity. I'll make it very brief. The cycling grid, the work done by the staff, everything they've done, first class, no questions whatsoever. I'd like, as was echoed before, I think we need to get a little bit more involvement from the neighborhoods and things like that. But what I'm talking about here is something slightly different. I believe the cycling grid is incredibly important. I've lived in countries throughout the world, and it's very beneficial. It adds a tremendous benefit to the downtown core. It's safe. It adds to the culture and community enhancement. Speaking of which, we're going through a very difficult period right now with the COVID and the fallout of all that situation. And what I'm going to ask you to do is, could you possibly consider delaying this for a short period of time? Because one of the things we need to do is to spend the money we're spending on this and perhaps divert it into affordable housing. And I don't mean going to developers and asking them cap in hand, can you give us a few little apartments for people to live in for a few years? I'm talking about building something like they have in our neighborhood, where we've got it on Linden Avenue and on the Victoria Park School, the old Victoria Park School here, where we have affordable, sustainable, affordable and supported housing. We need that. For people who are going to come downtown, for people who are going to try and live downtown, we need to do something about affordable housing. Can we not use this money, $6 million, and the $80,000 per kilometer per year that we're going to be spending on this, and divert it to bringing people and helping people? Because this COVID is affecting people very seriously. I know at least 2 families that have had to move completely out of Kitchener to houses way out in the middle of nowhere, and they have no ability to cycle from there. And that's just 2 families. There's many, many others. I get emails from people constantly asking, is there any way to build modular homes like they've done, modular communities, what they've done in Sweden, Finland, Norway, places like that. I picked those countries because they have a similar environment, a similar weather pattern as us. In fact, they're actually, in the case of Sweden, colder, damper. But they have done this. And all I'm asking is, the cycling situation is super, super important. But affordable housing is even more important. People who are going to be using the LRT, cycling, walking, all that sort of thing, these are the sort of people, these are the clients of a cycling situation, but they have to first be in an area that they can afford to live in. People who work in stores, if you want a downtown vibrant community, people who work in stores, service personnel, cooks, chefs, the hot list is endless. They need an affordable place to live in. If they can't afford, they're not going to come downtown. And if they're not going to come downtown, who's going to work there? Who's going to be in the restaurants? How can restaurants afford to be? Not many people, waiters, can afford a $700,000 condo. So all I'm asking you to do is to look at affordable, sustainable houses, not necessarily through developers. Developers have their own profit model, and I respect that. But this city, the previous configuration of this city, built Linden and built the Victoria Park affordable, sustainable housing situation. Why can't we do it again? Take this money, delay that situation slightly, or get more money and divert it into something. We're going to have people freezing to death on the streets. We need to do something. That's all I've got to say on that situation. Thank you very much for the time.
Thanks, Mario. We do have a question for you, Mayor Verbanovic. You need to unmute yourself.
Sorry. Thanks very much, Chair Ioannidis, and thanks, Mr. Chlonsky, for coming in. I'm just, in light of your comments, I'm just wondering, are you aware that Council recently approved our new economic development strategy, in which we allocated $15 million in either land or cash towards partnering with both the region and the federal and provincial governments in new affordable housing developments, and also that recently the federal government announced an allocation to the region, and we can apply for more for some quick hits in terms of the kind of housing that you're speaking of. I just wonder if you've had that the benefit.
No, I did not. I was doing research on it, and I know nobody mentioned that at all in all my research. Thank you very much for telling me that. I'm very surprised about it. So this will be a modular situation. I'm using a European model where it's something like a flat pack, pre-assembled sort of situations, one of those things coming into the neighborhood. Is that what we're looking at here, or are we talking about something through developers?
No, exactly. We're looking at using modular. In fact, there's a company in town called Z Modular who's actually building them here down across from our Kitchener operations facility, and others in Ontario who are doing it as well. But that's exactly what we're looking at, and I think it's fair to say that we're confident that we'll be. Well, I mean, we know that we've got a chunk of money already coming, and that there's more that we're eligible for and we'll be pursuing very actively.
Well, I thank you very much. I don't know why I wasn't told all this. I apologize. I spent the time doing all this design work for nothing. And I'm grateful I did it for nothing, because at least we're moving in the direction of something that's sustainable. Thank you very much on behalf of all the people who asked me to speak tonight.
Well, I'll get you your contact information from the clerk, and I'll make sure we send you some of that information on that affordable housing stuff.
Thank you very, very much, Matt.
Thank you.
Okay, I see we have no further questions. Thank you, Mario. With that, Madam Clerk, do we have any other delegations that have come up or any?
Through the chair, no, that was the last delegate.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
With that, we can have questions for staff. So if you have any questions for staff, please ring in. Councillor Chapman.
Yeah, my first question is for actually Heritage. Hi, Barry. Hi, Darren. I'll have some questions for you as well, but is Victoria here? No? Okay, well, I'll start with my questions to either Barry or Darren. And we've talked about this, so it's really, there are no surprises, but does staff plan to do a Victoria Park master plan, sort of looking at all the traffic options and cycling options and pedestrian options in the area? Not that, maybe not a plan, but do you see this as something that is worth considering, given that Victoria Park could be considered kind of an oasis in the city, and that it not just, today we heard from a lot of residents, or for a number of residents, but probably all of us at some point go through the park or go to events in the park. So there are concerns that come not just from people that live there, but people that come to the park. So, and those numbers are quite substantial, right? Those that come to the park. And there are concerns for the residents on what that looks like, and for people that travel there and get caught in traffic. So do you think that a master plan of traffic, active transportation for the park would be a worthwhile endeavor?
Through you, Chair Innes, there's a lot of information to unpack there, but what I would say is that staff currently don't have a transportation master plan for Victoria Park on their work plan. Is there benefit to doing so? In hearing the residents and in touching base with the residents over the last month or two, it's definitely something that has been identified in the past, and there may be benefit to doing so. So should council wish, they could direct staff to bring a report forward that would, flush out what that would look like. And so staff would need a little bit of time to really sit down and think about what a transportation master plan for the park could look like, where we'd find the budget for that, and how we would go about a process that would bring something like that forward.
Okay, and I say this because I think often we look at Hines Street, we look at Jubilee, we look at Water, we look at Joseph, but we never look at the whole picture. We look at Dill, we look at David, but you know, there's a whole sort of infrastructure here that could benefit from such an approach. So I'd like to move that we look into a Victoria Park Master Plan, traffic master plan, active transportation master plan. But my next question has to do with Joseph. And to do a master plan, but to put permanent infrastructure on Joseph Street, I wonder if it would make more sense to put temporary infrastructure on Joseph Street, like we have on Belmont or Queens Boulevard, turn it into one way, but make a temporary two-way bike lane, and see how that comes to impact the surrounding neighborhood. And so if it created a disastrous situation, which I think the residents are concerned about, which hopefully it would not, but then it could become permanent at some point, or maybe even that the infrastructure like we see on Queens and Belmont would suffice. So I'm not saying paint just sharrows on the sidewalk. I'm not saying to really modify anything that's being proposed other than turning permanent curb sort of divides into a more removable infrastructure if the results of the master plan showed that would be the case.
So through the chair, that wouldn't be my recommendation. And in terms of Joseph Street, it carries, roughly 3,000 to 4,000 vehicles a day, which, and we'll still have one direction. So we're talking 1,500 vehicles to 2,000 vehicles a day that are going to be redistributed. So what we found, or what the third party found, Paradigm Transportation Solutions found through the traffic impact study, was that there's pretty negligible impact in terms of creating that one-way system and having that traffic redistributed. And for the most part, that traffic will be redistributed to the arterial network. So there really should be very minimal impact on the local street network within Victoria Park itself as a result of that change. The other thing that I would note is that when we start talking about the flex stakes, especially that design that we have on Belmont and Queen, there is a substantially higher maintenance cost associated with that, because it's much more difficult to maintain than it is through the system that we've recommended here in terms of design. So part of the reason that we've recommended the design that we have is working with our operations department to minimize the overall operational cost.
Okay. Thanks, Barry. Councillor Chapman, if you have any further questions, please ring in. Your time is up. Up next, we have Mayor Urbanovic. Mayor Urbanovic.
Thank you very much, Chair Ioannidis, and thank you to staff for a very thorough report, and also to some of the changes that have been made in response to some of the concerns that we heard, particularly in relation to Water Street and Ontario Street. I think through that you've demonstrated that it wasn't just a listening exercise for the sake of checking off a box, but rather that you were listening and that we're trying to be responsive and finding this right balance. And, I think through this, there's no question that there is change, and for some people change will be a little more difficult, and for other people change will be a little easier. There were two questions though that still sort of kept popping up from those who did express concerns today, and I'm wondering if staff can comment on them. And specifically I'm looking at Duke Street and the concerns around drop-offs, access to the market, impact on area slow streets, and the idea of not having a raised median there now. And then the second one, this concern around Joseph Street. Is this the first you're hearing of those, or have you heard of them and have factored them into your thinking thus far? And then I have one follow-up after that.
Through the chair, I will tackle the Joseph Street part first, and then I'll likely turn it over to Darren Krupp because he's very familiar with the Duke Street and the access component, probably much more so than I am. So in terms of Joseph Street itself, it's something that we started to hear when we went through the initial communication in terms of overall design of the grid. So we were familiar with some of the challenges, particularly when we look at the residents from Hines Avenue. So generally speaking, we've heard positive feedback from the neighborhood as a whole, but there is a strong contingent on Hines Avenue that are very concerned, rightly so, that there may be some redistribution of traffic that could end up on Hines Avenue, creating a much more unsafe environment on Hines Avenue than exists today. We went through the exercise of reviewing it, and one of the things that we did to try to address that is to flip the direction of the one-way street of Joseph Street. So as you can appreciate, when we initially created the design, Joseph Street ran from Victoria Street to Queen Street. And in that scenario, what you could potentially have is some cut through that would use Jubilee Drive through Hines Avenue onto Joseph Street to get to downtown. It's much less desirable in the other direction. It's much easier to stay on either Charles Street or King Street or whatever arterial roadway network that you would be on. So we've did our best to try to make sure that there are no negative impacts to Hines Avenue. And that's also the reason that we took Water Street out of the plan. So yes, we were aware of the concerns regarding Joseph Street, but we think that we've done more than enough then to mitigate those concerns to ensure that the changes on Joseph Street don't negatively impact Victoria Park as a whole.
To add to that, in terms of engagement on Joseph Street, we actually haven't received any negative comments from people who live directly on Joseph, only support. It's been the side streets connecting to Joseph that have had those concerns. In terms of Duke and Cedar, there were two main things that we proposed changing around that area to improve some of the drop-off space. One was switching the direction on Duke Street. We did find that made it easier for folks to access that market kind of block. And we also looked at realigning the bike lanes through the parking bay that exists there. So that did improve, it allowed us the opportunity to keep some of the parking there. And we can look at finer details to ensure that those spaces are accessible. It doesn't mean that there has to be pedestrians walking into a bike lane, hopping over curbs to get to a parking spot. We can look at ways to ensure that those spaces remain accessible for people with varying abilities. The final point I'll make around Cedar Street and some of the congestion that's experienced on Kitchener Market, we actually see this as improving that congestion experience, because right now we have two ways of traffic at all of the intersections and going in and out of that parking garage. And now you're essentially going to make a right turn only into the garage and a right turn out. So the need for a traffic control officer may actually be removed on market days, because it's a simple, you're coming down one direction, you're turning right in, you're going right out. It's a very simple flow. And the congestion that's currently experienced at Cedar and King Street will also be reduced because you don't have oncoming traffic coming towards you. You have bike traffic, of course, but you won't have the same volume of vehicles. So that left turn from Cedar onto King will be easier. And of course, you can also continue onto Charles if that's preferred. So there are some things that can actually bring some benefit to while you might be going a little bit out of your way to get to that localized spot at Kitchener Market, it actually will be pretty quick and seamless to get in and out.
And I guess just on that, we can work with the region on the timing of that intersection at Cedar at King for Saturdays only, so that there's an extended left for people exiting, which would probably help to keep that flow going. Especially,
yeah, signal timings will all be adjusted based on the plan because of the new operation. So we can definitely look at something like that.
Okay, and then my question, I guess, to the chair is I heard, and I just want to make sure I understood correctly, the notion of a request for a motion to consider a Victoria Park master traffic plan. I haven't seen the official wording. Is that something, Mr. Chair, that you're going to look for a notice of motion for, or is that something that we're going to hear from staff on? because it seems like an extensive piece of work and something that has not worked through our strategic planning process. So I think we're going to need some direction from yourself or staff on that. Okay. Yeah, thanks for mentioning that. I was going to mention after you speak, because I forgot to say that I'm going to allow everyone to discuss the cycling, and I do agree with you that this is something that's bigger than, and it's separate from the cycling. So at that point, I'll take those comments, but I think that's something that it needs to be written down, and it's something that, you're right, is a significant amount of work, and it's outside of the strategic planning process as well. So I think it needs it'll definitely need some direction from committee for staff's participation. So up next, we have Councillor Marsh.
Okay, thank you very much, Chair Ioannidis. So I want to ask staff if they can comment on what is the holdup exactly on the region's decision for separated cycling lane on Duke between Frederick and Francis.
So through you, Chair Ioannidis, they are currently reviewing that plan, and they really, the holdup on their end is that Duke Street corridor is viewed as a transit corridor and a high priority for transit. So they just want to make sure that they do their due diligence to understand the overall impact that making Duke Street would have, making Duke Street one way would have to transit both GRT and to the ION itself. So I can tell you that the initial conversations that we've had with the region are positive, but they just want to take a little bit of extra time to understand those transit impacts.
Okay, great. And so do we have any definitive timeline from them, or can we, perhaps as a motion of this committee and council to send a direct, request to them to say, hey, we need you to please complete your due diligence in a timely way?
So our timing in terms of our phasing is reflective of what we know the region needs to be able to do in order to review Duke Street. So I don't think a notice of motion to the region is necessary at this time.
Okay.
The reason that we've phrased it the way we have is because we know that falls in line with their timing.
Okay, so can you remind me then, are you saying that the separated infrastructure that we have jurisdiction over on Duke between Frederick and Cedar is not going ahead next year? It would be planned for the year after?
Through the chair, that's correct. It's actually Duke Street in our plan is scheduled for 2023.
Say it again.
Duke Street within our plan is scheduled to be constructed in 2023.
2023. Okay, so we've got some time. And then in addition, some of the congestion that Victoria Park neighborhood streets experiences whenever Victoria Street, for example, is closed down. I can understand, I've experienced it myself as a driver. It's very frustrating, and I'm sure as a resident and as a small child, it must be very frustrating. I'm just wondering, can we work more closely with Google Maps, with Google on Google Maps, and maybe with other apps as necessary to try to really reroute traffic to the arterial roads in a more timely way?
So the chair, I think that's really a follow-up for staff to take back to our TIS department to see if there's a way to share particularly our road closures and our data in an open forum in a better manner to ensure that it's incorporated in those GPS apps.
We know that they already scrape our data as it is, and so
Yeah.
I think that should be a way that we can do that. But since we have Google Canada's headquarters right here in our city, I think that should be something that we should do. And so if you could please get back to us on any follow-up that's done, then we can see if we can do that. And Chair Ioannidis, I'll have comments later. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Up next, we have Councillor Michaud.
Hi, thank you. I just have one question for staff right now. With regards to Cedar Street, it is very congested down there on market days, coming from, well, east or west, I guess it is, right? has there been any concern about the impact it's going to have on the market with traffic coming in there? Because I just can't see how this changing Cedar to a one-way from Weber to Church isn't going to impact the congestion in that area.
Through the chair. Oh, Justin, do you want to jump in there?
Yeah, maybe I'll jump in on this one. So through the chair, we know that only a small portion of our markets shoppers actually utilize that parking garage. So like throughout the day, that's only a portion of our customers. And when the LRT was up and running before the pandemic hit, there's actually a big shift in the way that people access the market. And a lot of people walk from downtown or bike, the ones that are comfortable that try to get there. But we know there's latent demand for people that would like to bike there more. And so we think that this change will actually help improve the flow of traffic in and out of the markets. But we should be mindful as well that the garage is relatively small in comparison to our other garages, and that's only a portion of our market customers.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, thanks, Christine. Councillor Michaud. Just for committee's an update, just Victoria is able to answer questions. I guess she's having camera technical issues. Okay, so up next we have Councillor Singh.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. First off, I just wanted to point out that I have a conflict on part of the staff recommendation for the proposed conversion on Cedar Street, as I have family that own property along that stretch. So if that item can be voted on separately when we finally take a vote on it. And my question to staff is, as part of the presentation, it was outlined that obviously due to the pandemic and realizing real financial constraints, that this plan that has been in the works for some time, the full, I guess, the draw out of it has been deferred by a couple of years. But remind me again, either 2 or 3 years. Can a further explanation be given on rationale on extending it perhaps a little further to give some more relief rather than either the 2 or 3 to a 5-year timeline? And what would that mean on a operations and both capital out of taxes?
Through the chair, staff would need to spend a little bit more time really analyzing what it would mean to push it out from 3 to 5 years in terms of understanding the impact on tax base. That said, though, if we start to push it out to any great degree, there's some of the things that you'll see within the report that don't change, our contract administration, consultant fees, construction management and staff time, all of that stuff has to be done up front. And then as you push it out, generally speaking, what happens is construction costs go up anywhere from 5 to 7% right now annually. So, there would be a limited benefit to pushing it out potentially on the operating or the tax base initially. But overall, because you're pushing it out, your costs will actually increase. So you have a greater financial impact over the 5-year term than you would over the 3-year term. And then the other component that you miss is capitalizing on the ability to shift the way people move around in the downtown directly after the pandemic. So I think the one thing that we don't want to lose sight of is that the pandemic did show people that there are alternative ways to move around, not only for commuting, but for recreation as well. So the further out we push this, we lessen our ability to capitalize on one of the positives of the outcome of the pandemic.
Okay, if we wanted to get some clarity on my question before this would be voted by council, so I guess that would be a week from now, 2 weeks.
We can certainly look at the numbers over the week for sure.
Okay, so that would be helpful before council votes. I think that is a real question for us to have, especially as we look at capital coming up as well and realizing some of the constraints and the desire of council to see if we can lessen that overall tax impact to our taxpayers. Yeah, okay, I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Singh. We have Councillor Margaret Johnson.
Thank you. And through you, I would actually like to follow up on a question that Councillor Michaud asked about as well. The area around the market, I think it is really well. There's so many special places downtown. So don't get me wrong by my question, but it is very busy in and out of there on a Saturday. With people trying to get in and out of the garage. So I do think that is something maybe we need to, I don't know if we've done traffic studies there to see and traffic counts for there on a Saturday with people coming in and out of there. My other concern with that particular area, and I think it was Mr. Baker that had that lives in that building that's at the corner there. Just things like with that concrete median in the road, how do moving vans get in and out of there? The questions around delivery of products on a Saturday to the market and the vendors that are underneath the structure there. So I'm wondering if maybe you can comment on some of those logistical issues.
Through the chair, thank you for the question. We did have a series of meetings with the condo board at the Kitchener Market to work through some of their concerns. They do have a rear loading access for moving vehicles off of EB Street. So that's the primary place where people move the large volume of goods. The short-term drop-off piece is accommodated through those 3 parking spaces that we're maintaining. We anticipate and we'll negotiate with the condo board exactly how many, but probably 1, if not 2 of those spaces would be 15 minutes so that you can have a FedEx truck pull over, quick run in there of a delivery and get out of there again. And you're not getting that space blocked by someone who's maybe there for a 2-hour scenario. So that's one of the major benefits of having those 3 spaces maintained is we can maintain the deliveries quite well. And the condo board was quite pleased with that. They felt like it was a good compromise to at least ensure that there were some drop-off spaces there. Barry, do you want to comment further on just the general traffic piece around the market?
Yeah, so as Justin had mentioned earlier, we do expect that this will make it much easier to get to the market itself in terms of users and being able to get in and out of the garage. In terms of truck circulation getting to and from the market, making Cedar Street one way, what it essentially does is it will require that, for the most part, heavy trucks or trucks that are going to the market would be coming to and from Weber for the most part. If they were using the Cedar Street access and if they were using the EB Street side, their route really hasn't changed a whole to any great degree. They'll still have access from King, they'll still have access from EB, and they would still have access from Duke in one direction.
The chair, if I just may add a little bit further, I've just been messaging with Mr. Bloom, and his indication is that regular customers will find a new route to the market. And the one thing we haven't really touched on yet is that our population in downtown will be doubling over the next few years. And part of the intent of this grid is to support the behaviors we'd like to see in new residents moving downtown. And so if there's a network in place for when people move into their new homes, that this gives access to and from destinations like the market in sustainable ways. And so oftentimes people form their habits when they first move into a new place. And so, part of the timing, the alignment around this is to with all of the development work that's happening downtown.
Okay. That's all the questions from you, Councillor Johnston. Up next, we have Councillor Galloway-Sealock.
Thank you, Chair Ioannidis. I have just a couple questions. My initial question's been asked, so I'm going to piggyback on that a little bit. So if the cost is too rich for council, is there a secondary grid that we can look at that would potentially, like a scaled back version or one that would accomplish the same goals, but on a smaller scale?
Through you, Chair Ioannidis, I would suggest not. This grid is a result of extensive work by a community working group, the Cycling and Trails Master Plan, with staff and with stakeholders. I think if you start pulling pieces from this grid, then what you don't, ultimately you don't provide a grid at all. And so then you get more of a fragmented approach, and you don't create that environment that the grid is intended to create in terms of safe cycling in and around the downtown.
Through the chair, perhaps Mr. Luttenbach could speak to the funding sources for this and how it's planned to be paid for.
Okay, go ahead, Jonathan.
So through the chair, if you look at how we're planning to fund the cost, it is over multiple years within the capital forecast. As has been indicated, it was originally planned to be completed by 2022, and it's been shifted out slightly to accommodate going into 2023. In terms of the funding, most of it was already built into the forecast, so it was work that we had planned to do, aligning with the priority of council in terms of the strategic plan and seeing the downtown grid come to realization. In terms of funding sources, there's nothing that we're proposing within the capital forecast that would effectively reduce anything for this year in terms of looking at what we're proposing from a tax perspective through the budget. And so it is something that, it'd really be about what other priorities within capital you'd look at if the timing was shifted. And that's why we wouldn't recommend, moving away from what's proposed. We believe it actually addresses the need in terms of this project, and the funding sources have been identified, which, were in the forecast already, with the exception of additional gas tax funding that we are putting towards the shortfall. That funding is funding that was returned to reserves, and typically what we do try to do is maximize how we utilize that funding, because it is intended to be spent on capital priorities, and so that's how it's been allocated to address those issues related to this project.
Thank you for that. I want to make it clear, I'm not under the impression or the assumption that it would save on the tax levy at all this year. I know that capital doesn't do that, so it wasn't coming from that perspective. I think where I'm coming from is the overall project just seems to be costing a lot. And I guess my question is if we were to drag it out a little bit longer, is there the ability not to use the federal gas tax for this purpose?
So through the chair, the federal gas tax funding can be used for a number of different priorities within capital. We just recognized that this was a priority project that links to the strategic plan. And so we are looking for allocating the funding to see it fully realized. Gas tax is flexible in terms of how it can be utilized, and we do apply it to many different priorities within the capital forecast.
Okay. I'm not saying this is the route I'm going. I just need to ask those questions. So I'll have a comment at the appropriate time, Chair Ioannidis.
Thanks, Councillor Galloway-Seelock. Up next, we have Councillor Schneider.
Sorry. Thank you, Chair Ioannidis. Mr. Cronkite, just the comment has come up about, can we maybe try things on a temporary basis first? Sorry if I'm springing this on you, but with the cost of doing things temporarily, there's still a cost attached to that. And then, if we did it temporarily and we found it worked, then you'd have to put the permanent structure in. Is there any idea of what this might amount to, the cost of that would be? And I'm sorry, I'm kind of springing this on you. So even a ballpark would be great.
Through the chair. So we went through an exercise to determine what it would look like if we were to install temporary measures throughout the grid. And what we found is that the primary components of the cost aren't related to the concrete medians themselves, but rather to modifications to the signals, modifications to intersections and right-of-ways in certain areas. So if we were to do the entire grid in its totality in temporary measures, we save roughly $250,000 overall in terms of installation. So what you end up doing in that scenario is, increasing your overall capital cost, because you save very little by doing the temporary measures, only to turn around and replace them with more permanent infrastructure at a later date. So the cost related to that type of process is actually increased quite substantially.
Okay, thanks very much.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Schneider. Up next, we have Councillor Davey.
Thank you. Just one question on the funding, looking at the financial implications. And again, not that I want to go in this direction, just want to know what council's abilities are. Supposing, you know, the sky falls in terms of the economy or COVID or something else throughout 2021. I'm noticing that something like, well, about $2 million of this total amount comes in the years 2022 and 2023. The way this is structured, would there be, in that sky falling scenario, which we all hope doesn't happen, would there be anything preventing council from deciding to push those portions of it out at that point?
Through the chair, I would say no. You know, we will likely tender this as a multi-year project, but we could pull back in those subsequent years if we needed to.
Okay, I think that's an important note. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Davey. That sort of completes the first round of questionings. So we will be going for the second round of questions. Councillor Chapman.
Yeah, thank you. Can I ask, just if you were to separate just the cost of putting permanent structures on Joseph Street versus temporary, what would approximately what would the difference be? I'm just talking Joseph, not the whole.
Yeah. Through you, Mr. Chair. Again, I think that I don't have that number in front of me specifically, but I would expect that number to be fairly minimal because, again, the majority of the cost is actually coming from intersection improvements and signal improvements rather than the concrete median itself. So we can certainly look at what that number is prior to Monday, but I would expect it to be fairly minimal.
And if you could also come back with, you know, about approximately what it would cost for the signaling and the directional signage as well, just for that stretch. I'm just talking the Joseph stretch. I'd appreciate that. This is somewhat off track, but I think it's relevant to what I'm sort of suggesting we do with Joseph, and that is Belmont. So Belmont and Queens are temporary structures. Is the plan to eventually turn them into permanent structures? Segregated bike lanes?
Through you, Mr. Chair, we continue to monitor Belmont and Queens Boulevard, we don't have a plan per se yet in terms of what future will look like. We need to continue to do our studies and then we'll develop a plan from there.
And when might we receive the results of this study that's being done on that temporary arrangement?
We had anticipated bringing forward a report to council in late fall 2020. However, due to the pandemic, we want to ensure that when we're conducting our transportation studies that we're using the most accurate data possible. So we'll be looking at, in all likelihood, late fall of 2021.
Okay, thank you. Regarding heritage, I wanted to ask earlier, are there any heritage concerns that we need to be thinking about in Civic Center or in the Victoria Park Heritage District?
Through the chair, sorry, I'm just joining the meeting now. Through the chair, yes, both the Victoria Park Area Heritage Conservation District and Civic Center Neighborhood Heritage Conservation District are potentially impacted by the cycling grid. So I had reviewed the Heritage Conservation District plans for these areas and did provide detailed comment to the project manager. A formal heritage permit application was not required for these works, but we do anticipate involving the Heritage Kitchener committee members with respect to some additional details on the grid as it relates to street furnishings, wayfinding, signage, etc.
And what's the timing of that?
I would anticipate sometime in the early new year.
Okay, thank you. One last question I have, and this would be for Mr. Lockenbach, and that is regarding the capital out of current. I know when we look at the whole picture and how it's going to be funded, capital out of current, maybe you can explain that. I understand it to mean money coming out of the operating budget and being put into the capital budget. So in fact, that does, maybe you can clarify for me, does that not impact, you know, our property tax money and the allocation of that money?
Sure. Through the chair. So there's an annual allocation that we provide from the operating budget to capital. And so that does provide some funding to what we call the CC pool within the capital program. There's also other funding sources within that pool as well, which include funding from our hydro dividends that we do receive, as well as other sources. But essentially the CC pool is intended to fund tax supported base projects in the capital forecast. And so the funding that's been applied to the downtown grid in this case would be funding that would be allocated normally to capital to address our various capital priorities. What we've done this year to ensure that this can proceed is prioritize and keep this project within the 2021 sort of time frame for the first phase, as well as pushing it off in terms of 2022 and 2023. But that funding is provided on an annual basis, and then that pool funds the capital program. So it's not that the direct funding that you see in terms of the lines here is an annual contribution. It's actually funding that's built up in terms of a total pool or reserve that's being used to fund these capital priorities.
Okay. So I'll have comments later.
Thank you. Thanks, Councillor Chapman. Up next, we have Councillor Michaud.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just have one comment about the market again, and then I'll let that one go. And then I have a question with regards to the gas tax. For the market, I mean, I understand what Mr. Bloom said and what Mr. Cronkite said, and Darren Croft actually as well. The demographic of the market has anybody done a study on that? I mean, when I'm there, I think there's a majority of them are older people that drive in from the suburbs. So my concern is that I still think it's going to be too congested coming off Weber to get in there. And I know they do use the parking garage, and I'm at the market often and it is full. So and then when I hear the comments from staff, is the goal for this to eventually become a walkable market for the downtown core? And is there something down in the future that we're going to have a market somewhere else in Kitchener, or are we going to lose all those buyers to the Waterloo market, St. Jacobs market? I just want to know if there's any kind of thought on that, because it seems to me like we're just kind of focusing on pedestrian and cyclists, which is great. I mean, this whole plan is wonderful. I'm not negating that, but there still are people out in the suburbs that do drive into the downtown core.
Through the chair. So if anything, the pandemic has resulted in some of our drive-in customers diminishing lately, and that's likely people from the outer suburbs and other places that, you know, are they're looking for grocery shopping other ways. But the plan is still to have parking, the same number of parking that would be there previous, plus opportunities at other garages like the Charles and Benton garage, which we promoted, plus the LRT, which gets people from across more of the city and in parts of Waterloo that would have driven previously. And so, you know, the part of this overall strategy is having multiple transportation options for people to choose their transportation mode of choice to access the destinations. And so this isn't an us versus them, you know, cutting off access to cars to the market. We are still providing that and still providing the same number of parking stalls within the garage available during market hours. It's just the way that we apply some of our streets to increase the active transportation mode share.
Thanks. I would argue that it is going to be more difficult from driving from the suburbs here. And I would also hope that the pandemic isn't what we base this on, because everything's changed in the pandemic and people aren't driving anywhere really going in. And they certainly, the market, I'm sure, activity is less as it is everywhere else. But thank you for that. And for the gas tax, I just wouldn't mind some clarification. Could the gas tax at some point at any time be used for something like traffic calming measures? Is that something that's possible? I'm just curious to see, like in suburbs again, I'm talking about that, because I see it's going to be attached to this master plan trail cycling study.
So through the chair, gas tax can be used for a number of purposes, but the one stipulation is it can't be used for what would be considered operating related impacts. So there may be a bit of gray there in terms of traffic calming, in terms of whether that would actually fit within the requirements of the program. Studies are things that are eligible, and so that is something that could be used for gas tax funds, but there are restrictions clearly between capital works and also what you'd consider routine maintenance. So there would be the question related to how it would be interpreted.
I suppose as this master plan, cycling master plan continues on, it is going to be a connector with the suburbs to the downtown core. We want to make it safe and pleasurable for everyone across Kitchener to cycle. So I imagine it could be applied to that as we grow this master plan out a little further over the years. This is a 25-year plan, right?
So through the chair, we would have to look at what those requirements are and if it would fit within that funding, any kind of funding restrictions. But if it's something that would be eligible, it could be. We try to apply gas tax quite broadly across the capital forecast and as priorities come up. And so it is something that we consider with every budget cycle in terms of how that's allocated.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Michaud. Councillor Marsh.
Thank you. I just want to ask staff a little bit about how might a delay of the rollout of this minimum cycling grid affect the overall impact that it might have on safe cycling?
So through the chair, pushing it back, it does exactly that. It pushes it back. And so what happens is you're postponing the ability to move around and get around in the downtown and choosing different mode choices in the downtown. And when you're simply postponing that and saying, well, we'll address that at a later date. Is it the end of the world? Potentially not, but as Mr. Riedman had indicated earlier, our population in the downtown specifically will double in the near future. And so to ensure that people have the appropriate transportation choices in place, I would suggest that we want to make sure that we were to build the grid sooner rather than later. So it wouldn't be, my preference obviously is to build it as soon as possible. I don't love that it was pushed out to 2023 as it is, because I think that further limits the ability to make those choices as people are initially moving in. So that's something to keep in mind. Like, we've already pushed this out a year, and to push it out is any additional length of time further has a negative impact on that initial transportation choice for the residents that are moving into downtown Kitchener.
Thank you. Mr. Riedman, looks like you have.
Yeah, through the chair, we heard some delegates talk about the lack of the presence of cyclists that are being observed in Kitchener. And so the communities that have built the network in their downtown as more of a complete process have actually seen the biggest returns on that in terms of the perception of success of the grid. And so, I know some different cities were highlighted in here, but my understanding is some cities saw 700% increases when they did a whole network. And so the piecemeal approach results in piecemeal cyclists being, or people changing over to their mode.
I think that's worth repeating. Can you just say that a little slower? What's the percentage that other cities have seen increase in cycle ridership?
Through the chair, so some cities in Canada have seen up to 700% increase in cycling ridership in the downtown.
Yeah.
And
thank you. That's incredible. Yeah. Okay. And and I just want to, if I may, Chair, I just want to respond to one of the comments about the market. I know that we have done polling of who the market goers are at the Kitchener market, and we know that we have a wide range of ages, as well as where people are driving from or cycling from or taking public transit from or walking from. It's not just downtown dwellers. And it's usually been about 10 to 12,000 people in a Saturday. And recently I talked to a market manager, and we're counting, as some of you who go to the market still will know, we're counting how many are coming, and that and we still have over half of what we normally would have. So it's somewhere, and I'll get the exact number so I can share it with all of you. It's definitely over 6,000 every Saturday now during the pandemic, when we have restrictions on numbers. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. So that concludes our rounds of questions. And up next we have comments. So I will go to Mayor Urbanovic.
Thank you, Chair Ioannidis. And I guess to begin with, I don't believe anybody's moved this yet. So to get the dialogue going, I will move the recommendation. I understand there'll be a separate recommendation coming forward to deal with the issue of a Victoria Park transportation study, and we'll deal with that separately. But if I can just briefly speak to it and really raise 5 key points around why I'm moving this and why I think this is the time for us to move this, and why this is the time for council to support it. First of all, active transportation was a priority of this council when we set our strategic plan at the beginning of this term. And that saw us focusing on a few areas, both trails, as well as a commitment towards investigating a dedicated downtown cycling grid and more cycling infrastructure throughout the city. And we know that COVID-19 has only seen us bring about increased demand around the city, around other cities in this region and across the country. And we know that making these kinds of investments only increase the numbers of people we see cycling, and the perceived and very real impact it has on their safety. I think from a public input point of view, we see that there's been extensive engagement. As the report indicates, there were over 5,700 residents engaged through the various engagement opportunities, both our strategic plan, the Cycling and Trails Master Plan, and this initiative. And almost 3/4 of them actually support the direction that we're going. And that was indicative, I think, even today in terms of the kinds of feedback we receive from the delegations that spoke today. I know one of the concerns that has been brought up is the market, and as Councillor Marsh just pointed out, it does attract a wide variety of people. And while there are some people who certainly drive there, including an older population, and there will be an adjustment in terms of traffic patterns, there are many people, and you know, and while I don't go there weekly, I go there frequently, and there are many people that I see walking from surrounding neighborhoods or cycling from surrounding neighborhoods with their carts in hand or kids in hand, and working their way to the market. And so I think that will continue. And I do respect staff's professional expertise on traffic flow in and out. And even when I think about it logically, and my own frustrations from time to time, whether I'm coming from King or Weber, and then the issue of a police officer being there and controlling your access into the garage and so on, having everything flowing in one direction, I think will actually be helpful in that regard once we get over that initial impact that's going to occur. I think the last, second last point I want to make is the one that Mr. Weidman has made, and Mr. Cronkite, and that's the fact that we are going to have a large number of new people moving into the core. And so the time to impact their transportation patterns is not once they move in and then try to do it 6 months or 9 months later, but in fact to do it as they're moving in, and have them formulate those patterns early on. And the final point I want to make is this is going to continue to be a priority of the federal government. I mean, that was clear in the fall economic statement, as Minister Freeland talked about economic stimulus coming out of COVID. And certainly in any of the conversations, we've been having with Minister McKenna, Minister Freeland, and others through the Big City Mayors Caucus as we talk about post-COVID. The focus on economic stimulus will be a green focus. And this is very much one of the kinds of things that gets talked about, as does green tech and so on. And so I think it also, approving this will help us make sure we have it shovel ready if and when those announcements come. And I suspect some of those announcements will be coming in the spring 2021 budget. I was pleased to hear the answer to Councillor Davies' question that, if things were to blow up, and I think we all hope, and I just, in the course of this meeting, heard that the first vaccine will be arriving next week in Canada. I think we're all hopeful for a positive 2021, but if for some reason things do go awry, we also have the ability to pull back the reins if that becomes necessary. So I think in many ways the stars really are aligned. There are a few questions that will come back for council next Monday, but I believe we should approve this and move forward with it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Verbanovic, and thanks for moving the recommendation. Councillor Chapman.
Yeah, thank you. So first of all, I want to say that I think staff has put together a great plan, and I really want to commend them and thank them for the work that they've done with the residents to make modifications and listen to what was being proposed. And I know the residents certainly in Ward 9 are very appreciative of that as well. I would like to say, I'd ask Mr. Bunn if he could put up the amendment to the motion. I don't think there's a need to bring it to a fuller new motion. And the motion would be that staff bring forward a report that outlines the cost scope of a transportation master plan that could be conducted during phase 2 of the grid installation. So it would be to not do a master plan, but to come up with an overview of what it would cost to do a master plan. So I'd like this to be amended to the current motion that's on the floor. And I would also like to amend, to introduce another amendment, and that would be that we move the Joseph Street part of the motion to phase 2. So that at that point, we should be able to have a better understanding if we can go ahead with the transportation master plan for Victoria Park. So those are the 2 amendments I would like to propose.
Okay. So how I'm going to proceed with this is I'm still going to move forward with your first motion as secondary to what's up on the table, and your second motion, which is the removal of Joseph Street. I will allow that for within this discussion because it is relative to the current motion that's on the table. Okay.
It's not the removal; it's the deferral to stage 2.
Sorry, I wrote it wrong. It's deferral. Thank you for that. Okay, we have Councillor Marsh. No, Councillor Galloway Seelock is next.
Yeah, I'll just be quick and brief. I just wanted to make a comment because of some of the questions that I asked. I think this is an ambitious and great plan. My concern lies strictly with the price tag that's attached to the plan. I'm concerned with the funding coming from the federal gas tax. I think it can be used elsewhere. especially in the economic times that we're dealing with right now. But having said that, I want to thank staff for all their work and engagement that they've done on this plan. It's comprehensive. It's a very comprehensive document. And I think that at the end of the day, cost aside, that I can sit here and support a great plan moving forward. But I do want to see that the overall cycling plan looks across the city as we continue to move forward with the master plan.
Okay, excellent. Thank you, Councillor Galloway Seelock. We have Councillor Marsh next.
Thank you, Chair Ioannidis. So I just want to make a few comments. So first, I want to just say that the downtown cycling grid that we're seeing before us today is really the result of not just the consultations that staff did for this study, but also years and years of hearing from residents that they would cycle more frequently for commuting and for leisure if they felt safe to do so. We know that protected lanes and connectivity into our downtown core really do have the potential to be transformational in turning our city into a cycling-friendly community. We see from other cities like Ottawa, Montreal, Edmonton, Vancouver, and others that were listed in the report, where they made bold investments in cycle infrastructure in a quick way. It wasn't a delayed rollout, that it succeeded in increasing ridership because it feels safer for people, both young and old, and in between, to choose to take their bikes. I also want to thank staff for their work in engaging with the businesses and the residents, and for really listening and really changing some of the plans. I'm a little disappointed in some of the changes as well, because it does mean that it is really a very minimum grid that we're working with here. It's not, you know, with all the bells and whistles that it could have, which is really, you know, it's doable. But some of my colleagues have asked about the financial impact of delaying the rollout, how that might impact our finances and make it more palatable. But what I want to know also is how might the finances be improved if we sped up the rollout, especially if we were able to access the Green Municipal Fund or other funds that may be coming out, as the mayor indicated, maybe even as early as 2021. So let's find that out and see if we might be able to make this happen more quickly. I also want to take the time to just thank so very much all of the 19 delegates who came forward today and shared their perspectives with us. I really appreciate that Mr. Baker came with very thorough analysis about how the impacts of the Duke Street lanes will change the way that the market condo dwellers use that street. And I also really want to thank especially Sam Labin for his very powerful presentation that used the perspective of his kids to demonstrate why this cycling grid is so necessary, and the map that shows really Ward. he wasn't able to get to Ward 10 from Ward 9 because which is just across the street, because it doesn't feel safe to do so, and that's very impactful to see. So I really encourage my colleagues to support this recommendation, and I truly and wholeheartedly support it. Sorry, one more comment. Normally we hear people say that we just are hearing the usual suspects, the cycling enthusiasts, when we hear about motions for cycling infrastructure. But today we have really seen a wide range of people. We've heard from developers, we've heard from parents, we've heard from senior citizens who are retired. We've heard from everyone in between, and we have heard from a few cycling advocates. But my goodness, this is not a niche issue. This is a citywide issue, and the research has been done in other cities. We're not leading the way in this regard. We're following, and it's time that we act. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Marsh. We have Councillor Davey.
Thank you, and apologies, Mr. Chair, but I just need to add, because it's a new amendment, I do need to ask staff if there are any implications or what the implications might be with respect to the proposed deferral of Joseph Street to 2022.
Okay, I will allow that because I was going to ask that.
Thank you.
Okay.
Through the chair, so I did want to point out on page 6-10, in phase 1 lists the projects, and so the deferral of Joseph would actually result in a number of disconnected streets, and there would actually be no connection in the network through or across downtown if that does proceed. And so staff are very careful in looking at how to phase out these projects to make sure that that each phase built upon components of a successful grid on top of each other. So it would result in a disconnected water Queen and Cedar Streets that wouldn't actually have any east-west and based on Kitchener's direction or south based on the overall Waterloo region directions.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. And I'll just comment briefly then, if I could, Mr. Chair. So as has been mentioned, in terms of the finances of this, it is a sizable price tag. But I'll make a few points on that. Number one, the bulk of this is already in our budget. So the bulk of it will not affect the tax levy in any way going forward. The balance of it is at our discretion in future years. It's not something that I think anybody wants to do, but if we do end up facing significant challenges, we can revisit it. Again, it's not something that I hope to see or want to do, but it is there. In terms of the price tag itself, I don't want to reopen old wounds, but as much as I hear that this is a significant price tag, I feel I have to point out the prudence in our decision earlier in the year in turning down sidewalk snow clearing throughout the city. Because as big as this price tag is, we could have built almost 2 of these every single year forever for the same price as that other service that we chose not to do, so that we could do more progressive things like this, which I think are equally as important. So I will be supporting this. I do have some concerns about the one-way streets, but I'm sure that we're going to figure that out and work through it. And I also want to say, just again, I thank you as well to the delegates. I think it was Michael Clark who mentioned the point about seeing parents teaching their kids to ride their bikes in downtown. And we have to realize that many of us have been spoiled by living in the suburbs our whole lives and teaching our children, letting the back of that bicycle seat go on our own sidewalks and open spaces. And I think the people in the downtown deserve that as well.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Davey. Up next, we have Councillor Johnson.
Yes, thank you. And Councillor Davey did ask my question about what would happen if we remove Joseph Street from here. I did have a follow-up question about the amendments as well. And actually, it kind of piggybacks on something Councillor Ioannidis has brought up before around our thoughts around putting more money into transportation. My question is, if we, even if we're looking at the price tag of doing a study on Victoria Park, how much staff time is that piece going to take? And therefore, and you might not be able to answer this, Mr. Cronkite, but when we use staff time, how much does that piece cost again? Whenever we ask to do these different studies.
Through the chair, staff time in transportation is primarily accounted for through the operating administrative budget. So it's all accounted for. Generally speaking, what happens though is that if we're asking to do one study, it will defer something else. So in this instance, the person that would be looking at, looking at the parameters, the transportation master plan for the park would be the same staff person that's working on the Vision Zero report that will come back to council later in 2021. So what that could mean is that the Vision Zero report would be delayed while they work on this component.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. We have Councillor Gazzola.
Yeah, I haven't asked any questions. A lot of questions that I had were asked. We've heard a lot of wonderful Pottersville comments this morning. I did understand the comment about the cuteness of puppies. It's very interesting. I just want to state that I consider myself a cyclist. I still did a lot of cycling this year. I'm 82 years old and I've cycled downtown. And it's interesting, although I cycled as a youngster, there came a time when it wasn't cool to be a cyclist anymore. It was time to start driving cars. So now times have changed somewhat. I got back into cycling about 20 years ago when no other member of council would sit on the cycling committee, and I volunteered to do so and got back into cycling quite actively and have been since then. So I can totally appreciate all the comments that have been said about cycling and how important it is and the value of it and what we have to do. I must admit, I did hang up my bike last week. And the reality is that I live in Canada and not in the Netherlands. And I'm now looking for an indoor exercise bike. I can appreciate all of the work that staff have done and all of the ideas, tremendous ideas. It's very visionary. There's no question about it. I realize that in 25 years, private ownership of an automobile will be a thing of the past. We won't own our own automobiles. We'll all be dealing with Uber vehicles that drive themselves, electric vehicles. And when we get into that, it's been shown that we're going to need much smaller roadways because self-driving vehicles are much better than humans and can make much better use of space. And so when that happens, and that's not that far down the road, you're going to have roadways getting a lot smaller, and you're going to have a lot more room for pedestrians and cycling. So we are being very visionary. Hard to say anything contrary to that. It's very good. So it's a way of the future, and 25 years will come very fast before you know it, and we will be there without owning vehicles anymore. So the nasty car will be gone, and so will all the bad gases that we get from it. Now we've heard from a lot of people today. I think there were 19 people, and the majority of them, I don't think there's anyone that spoke against what we're planning to do. I mean, it really is a tough thing to not support, but there were a number of people that did have, there were about 3 or 4 people that had somewhat different viewpoints. And if you have a different viewpoint in this day and age, you're called a naysayer. But I think they had some very good points of view. Mr. Baker, who has, as a municipal engineer, obviously has a great deal of experience, spoke about a lot of the concerns. He again wasn't opposed to it, but there are a lot of concerns. And one of the things that he did mention was that most people are unaware of what's going on here. Okay, I don't care what you've heard. You've heard from a lot of people, but the majority of the people in our community, I don't really think are aware of where we're going. And I believe that a lot of those people would not be in favor of a totally where we're going and as how quickly we're going to it. So I'm going to try to represent the many people who are somewhat unsure about this. Now, I do this with some experience in that we did a couple of years ago, we did an experiment with Queen Street and Belmont. And this was an experiment, I understand. It was a $600,000 project on how to get people from the suburbs downtown. I didn't think we needed it because there was already ways of doing that. I live out in the suburbs in that area. I did and continue to get downtown without going near more than half a block of street traffic, vehicle traffic. I didn't think we needed that, but the problem I have is that I've not heard what the success or failure of that experiment was. I see with my own eyes, and I hear every Sunday from at least half a dozen people that go to church in that area questioning the validity of those segregated bike lanes. And you see with your own eyes. I keep asking staff for details about what are the results, and it's been very limited as to the experience that the results. And before we get into a big project like this, that's exactly, I would like to see a little more definite, specific information, not throwing out a figure of 700% increase somewhere. Well, what are the details behind the 700% increase? And the other point is, if we go into I might as well say when we go into it, because I know where we're going. When we go into this, what are some of the results that we can nail down to say, yes, it's been a successful experience? We don't look at we just want to get this done. We want to be there. We want to be in a place where people will talk and they can point to Kitchener as a great place and all that. But it would be nice to know what are our goals in doing this, and some real specific goals, so that in 3 years we can look at it and say, yes, we attained that goal, or we fell short on it. So having said all of that, I'm asking for a recorded vote. I will not support it. I do think that there were some good comments. Like one of the delegates, Ms. Storing, brought up several good points on let's not throw it aside, but let's do some things, less intrusive plans that we can move ahead on quickly. Another delegate talked about dealing with connections. We still have a lot of problems in our cycling with dealing with connections, which I think are much more important than this, but that we haven't dealt with. I would really like to see, this is not the time to be spending $7 million. We're looking at $5.9 million here. And then we're looking at another $1.1 million in a special grant that we're going to deal with later today. $7 million in the next 2 or 3 years. This is not the time for it. Can we not look at how we can delay things and we need to do some more research on these one-way streets and whatnot. So I'm not opposed to where we're going, but I do believe that I don't want to see something go flying through as unanimous, like it's everything's good, everything's perfect. There's no other things to consider. So in summing up, I'm very supportive of a lot of things that are going on, but I will not support the motions before us today.
Okay. Thank you, Councilor. Councilor Michaud.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to thank staff as well as the rest of the councillors for this in-depth study and doing such a great job on this, as well as the citizens who participated in this study and the delegates who came today. I'm enlightened to see this project, actually start, and I I do think that we have made progress in connections with the suburbs and the core. I mean, I rode my bike downtown, I'll say 5 years ago, and I could only get to Cortland and then I'd have to go on the sidewalk. But now I could literally get on my bike and ride right downtown through trails and bike lanes. And so we have made progress, and I am really, I look forward to having this connection grow even further so people from the suburbs can get downtown or can get from A to B a lot easier. And I hope that that's the direction this is going. I think it is. But staff, you did a great job on this. So I support it. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, we have no further comments, and I'll relay my comments. First of all, I just want to thank the staff for all for all their hard work on their presentation and all the due diligence that they did to bring this information forward. I want to thank all the residents that showed up with their presentations. A lot of them were really, most of them were all very thoughtful and had really good points made. So with that, I do agree with many of the comments that my fellow colleagues have made with regards to this proposal. And I truly believe prior to the pandemic, I probably would have said, I think we would have need to slow down a little bit on this and phase it in a little bit more than what's being suggested. But having the benefit of during the pandemic and seeing other communities and traveling to other communities, in particular their cores, I think more than ever, there is this transportation shift that is occurring. And not only that, it's an attitude shift that's occurring. And granted, I'm probably going to be upset with some of these things as I drive my car to some of these things. And again, I have to think of it in the lens as it's not just for me, but it's for the future of our children. And again, this is 50 years worth of infrastructure that we're looking at plus. And no time is a better time than now is to move forward with these building better and more sustainable modes of transportation. I have no. Who raised their hand? Sorry,
Sorry, I did.
Okay,
I did, Council Chair Ioannidis.
Okay.
Sorry, is it possible to I'll be quick with comments?
Sure.
Okay, thank you so much. Part of what we do is a council is we set priorities, and we do that through the strategic plan, which is done through a lot of engagement with our residents. One of the pillars of our strategic plan is people-friendly transportation. The points encouraging and incentivizing alternate modes of transportation, install a continuous and protected cycling network, improve connectivity. In our cycling trails master plan, the downtown grid is the priority. This is the heart. This is the start of it. With this, it can be built into from all areas of the city. We have to look at what things are like now and what they will be, what things are going to look like in the future. Our downtown is going to build up. And as we heard from one of our delegates, that there will be buildings that don't have any parking. So the modes of transportation will be transit, will be pedestrian, will be cycling. So I just, want to point that out, that this is part of what our citizens want. This is part of the strategic plan, and we need to follow through on what we say we're going to do, what our citizens' priorities are. We need to fulfill that. We need to follow through. I do want to thank all the delegates who spoke today. Great information, great things to ponder. Everyone who was part of the engagement and was staff, and thank you staff for listening and for adapting things. I know there's been a recorded vote called for. I would like to ask that the results of the recorded vote are part of the communication by the city. So when this is known, it's known who supported and didn't support it, and it's reflected in that as well. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Schneider. All right, so we're now going to start dealing with the motion that's been brought forward by Councillor Debbie Chapman with regards to moving Joseph Street, I guess, additions to a second phase. And with that, we do have a recorded vote. So I will start off with how I see it on my screen from top to right. So I'm going to do something different. So with the recorded votes, I'm going to go with Councillor Gazzola.
Yeah, I will vote in favor of that.
Councillor Chapman. Councillor Christine Michaud. Sorry, you need to unmute.
This is the motion for what that Ms. Chapman put through forward?
That's correct.
Could you read it again for me? I'm sorry.
It's basically to defer the additions on Joseph Street to the second phase. Or the raised concrete, if that's the part, I think, that the raised portion.
No, I'm not going to support that.
Okay. Councillor Marsh.
Opposed.
Councillor Schneider.
Opposed.
Councillor Galloway Seelock.
I'm opposed.
Councillor Chapman.
In favor.
Mayor Verbanovic.
Opposed.
Councillor Singh.
Opposed.
Councillor Davey.
Opposed.
Councillor Johnson.
Opposed.
And myself, opposed. Okay, so now we're going to go deal with the main motion, but we're going to deal with the conflict of interest first. And I don't know if we want to go with the recorded vote with just the conflict of interest part. You want to go with that? Okay, we'll go with Councillor Margaret Johnson. So it's basically agreeing to the portion which is of Councillor Singh's conflict, which are on Cedar Street and stuff like that. I can't recall exactly. You want to say something, Councillor Singh, which they are?
Yes, it's on Cedar Street, as my parents own property where the roadway conversion would be from a two-way to a one-way.
Okay, so we're going to deal with that one. So Councillor Johnson.
Yes, thank you. Agreed.
Councillor Davey.
In favor.
Councillor Singh abstains. Mayor Verbanovic.
Support.
Councillor Chapman.
Support.
Councillor Galloway Seelock.
I'm in favor.
Councillor Schneider.
In favor.
Councillor Marsh.
In favor.
Councillor Christine Michaud.
In favor.
Councillor Gazzola. Are you in favor or opposed, Councillor Gazzola?
I'm sorry, I muted myself. I'm opposed. Sorry about that.
And I'm in favor. So now on the balance of the motion passed by Mayor Verbanovic, Councillor Gazzola.
Opposed.
Councillor Michaud.
In favor.
Councillor Marsh.
In favor.
Councillor Schneider.
In favor.
Councillor Galloway Seelock.
In favor.
Councillor Chapman.
In favor with reservations.
Mayor Mayor Verbanovic.
I'm in favor.
Councillor Singh.
In favor.
Councillor Davey.
In favor.
And Councillor Johnson.
In favor.
And myself, I do vote in favor. So I'm just wondering if we should take a bit of a break here because I'll let Mayor Verbanovic,
Yeah, Mr. Chair, we are running significantly late and we have our in-camera delegations waiting, but there are also, I understand, 2 people waiting for item number 2. sorry, yes, number 2, which is the golf cart path agreement, which seems fairly straightforward. I'm wondering if we can finish that and then just take like a 5-minute break and go into camera, and then we're going to have to come back to the rest of community services and the rest of special counsel later on.
Okay. I don't see any issues with that. Considering I would like to appease the delegation. So we'll go with the item number 7, dealing with the Ministry of Transportation of Ontario Golf Cart Path Agreement. And we do have a 5-minute presentation. Whenever you're ready.
Good afternoon, Chair Ioannidis and Council. The presentation is not a presentation. It's really just 2 slides to show where the golf course impact is. So on the first slide, if clerk can help with, there is the 401 highway where the work is being done is in that black circle that's impacting the Dune Valley Golf Course. And then on slide 2, there's just an image showing that in the black dotted or the slashed out, that's where the new cart path will go. So it's moving close towards the Grand River. Where it traditionally was is the lighter shaded gray cart path. So we're just moving the distance, and it's really to accommodate the abutment of the highway to support the bridge and to support the 401 structure. So today I do have with me, in case there were any questions about the construction project, we were fortunate to get the senior project engineer with the MTO, Valerie Natatis, to join us, as well as Mark Belik-Servek, the senior project manager with WSP Global. So the 2 of them are here to answer any questions. It is a 4-year construction project. The golf cart path is necessary for the operation of the 8 holes on the south side of the golf course. Not advancing the cart path will actually put us at risk of no revenues for 4 years, which would annually exceed $246,000 a year. So the capital investment of investing in the trail or the cart path makes sense to support the viability of the golf operation. In addition, even if we chose not to activate the 8 holes during that construction period, the cost savings would not be there because you still have to maintain the course conditions. And many of our operation is still in place. Pro shop staff, none of those numbers decrease just because we lose the access to 8 holes. So staff are recommending the investment in the cart path and moving forward with the agreement with the MTO to include this in their construction project for the construction of the cart path.
Okay. I do see that there's 3. Thanks, Kim, for your presentation. I do see that there's 3 members of committee that like to have some questions, and I didn't see the first 2 between Councillor Gazzola and Davey, who went first. So I'm just going to go with the way it is. We'll give Councillor Davey here. Go ahead.
Thank you, Chair Ioannidis. You're actually right. I was the first in the queue anyway. Sorry, 2 quick questions. I don't need a lengthy response. Just need to know, because I didn't really see it in the report, that we explored the possibility of converting the existing holes that are on the I'm going to call it the right side of the 401 and returning Dune to an 18-hole course for the 4 years. I know there certainly be costs in that. I just need to hear that staff looked at that and they realized that the costs would be more expensive that way.
So through Chair Ioannidis, yes, staff did look at the impacts of alternating the golf course and its format for that 4-year construction period.
Okay, that's fine. The more important question I need to answer to here is, and I'm glad we have the delegates appearing, and I thank them for being here, but I need to know if this was a private golf course would they be treated in the same way? Because I would assume there would have been some compensation in some way for the ministry cutting off that contact. So I need to hear that if this was a private sector operator, they would have been treated the exact same way in terms of the costs and expenses.
Hello, I'm Valerie Nada from the Ministry of Transportation. When we deal with any kind of proponents, using our right-of-way, we do have agreements and we do have permits that they would have to go through. So far, the City of Kitchener has been using the MTO right-of-way without any cost, but this cost here is to, keep the people protected while we're doing our construction at the Grand River bridges. So there would be cost associated with keeping the golf cart path open.
Costs associated on the provincial side, you're saying?
To the people who are using the golf cart path. So in this case, City of Kitchener, or if it was another proponent.
Okay, so again, is there any familiar cases where there was a situation where a private sector entity was, their business would be substantially impacted to this point and there's been no compensation going to them, to your knowledge?
I don't know to my knowledge about the golf course. Yes.
Okay. Okay, I don't expect staff would have the answer to that question either, but I would hope that we could explore that, how the private sector would have been treated in the situation prior to ratifying this at council. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Davey. Up next, we have Councillor Gazzola.
Yeah, actually, I was interested in the first question that Councillor Davey had asked. This is coming back to council, right, in a week or so for ratification?
Yes.
Hello?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Could we get some more detail on what it would take? What would happen if we did close off those holes for the 4-year period? Just a little more detail. You're stating that it would cost us something, but could you not just show us exactly what it will cost us so that we can consider that in making a decision?
Sure, or I can actually.
Is that possible?
It is possible. I can even tell you today. So our cart revenue from the 9-hole classic and
No,
you want it in.
Kim, I prefer if you send us some detail that we can sit and look at. Okay.
Very good.
We have
yes.
to.
Yes, we'll provide that.
Okay. The other question, I was trying to understand what the $277,000 is for, and Valerie from the ministries mentioned about protecting players during the construction. Can you just give us a little more detail on what's involved?
Sure. Through you, Chair Ioannidis. So what's included in the construction is actual concrete cable mats so that the carts can actually move across the cart path. So the existing cart path will not be there because the construction that'll be underway. And so because of its proximity and it's not a permanent structure until after construction, there are concrete mats that will be installed yearly and then dismantled and then reinstalled. There's also hoarding that will go up so that the golfers are protected while they're passing under the construction zone so that it ensures that they have safe passway through. And then that hoarding, because of its proximity to the river, also has to be removed and installed seasonally. And then there's a little bit of storage in the off season. And then the final cart path is included in that construction.
Who looks after that work? Is that something that the ministry is looking after? It seems, I don't understand. I'm not an engineer, but I don't understand putting it down, taking it up, putting it down, taking it up has to cost a lot of money. Is there no better way of doing that?
Through you, Chair Ioannidis. So a number of ways of trying to secure the cart path for the duration of the construction were considered and reviewed. This was the least expensive option that was there for us. The project will be part of the scope of the reconstruction and the maintenance work that's being led by the MTO. So they're doing the oversight project management as well as the design and the costing for the work.
Have we asked the ministry to pay for this? The province seems to have a nice money tree that they shake very often. Can they not give it a little shake and help us out here? Have we asked them for assistance?
So through you, Chair Ioannidis, yes, we did. Actually, very early on, we went through a legal opinion on not only internally, we reviewed our easement. So at any time, the MTO can actually take away our right of access to the south side. It is just an easement agreement that we have. It's a right of way at no cost to the city. So we have not paid for the access that we've had in the past, nor are they looking for a fee for the future. So we did, as we sat down, the MTO staff will know that we tried to find any way that we could reduce costs or have costs incurred to the construction. And they've worked very closely with us to try and find anything that would help or assist keep those costs down. And this is the best proposal that we could come up with.
Thank you. If I could just make one quick little comment rather than phoning in again here. Is that okay, Mr. Chair?
Sure.
Yeah, no, I would really like to look at this. You know, we just last week reviewed the financial report for the golf course, and you know, for the past year, every time another golfer came and played, we lost money. So, you know, the golf course is in pretty serious condition. I mean, their things don't look that rosy for them. And if this were a private club, I don't think a private club would spend another $277,000 in a losing venture. I think they'd find ways to get around that. So I did also say that yes, the golf course does have a good banker in the city, and the sun will still come up in the morning. But I'm just questioning whether it's the best financial decision to make. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm just prepared to move the recommendation, and I could comment, but I'll leave it at that for now.
Okay, it's so moved by you, Councillor Davey.
Yes, sir. I'm not commenting either. I just needed clarification as well. I forgot to ask. Is this additional cost already reflected in, I guess it's 082 of the operating budget?
Through you, Chair Ioannidis, yes, it is reflected in the current.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
Okay. I see no comments unless Councillor Galloway-Selak wants to say something. No? Okay, with all that, we'll put it to motion. All those in favor? Opposed? Okay, that's carried. And we are gonna go take a break for as the mayor had mentioned, to go into caucus first. But I just want to update everyone. I did not forget Councillor Chapman's motion, that we will deal with that later as well. Go ahead, Mayor Urbanovic.
So sorry, I turned myself off instead of on. I'll move that we recess until after the first finance meeting from this committee.
Okay.
So you got to take a vote on that.
All right. So all those in favor? Opposed? That's carried.
Okay, so I'll call the special council meeting to order, and I will, the balance of the agenda we'll deal with after the end of community services, after the end of finance. But right now, we'll just move that we go in camera for the listed item. Moved by Councillor Galloway-Selak, seconded by Councillor Johnson. All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. motion to recess, moved by Councillor Schneider, seconded by Councillor Singh. Thank you. Those in favor, opposed, that's carried. Folks, let's take 15 minutes before we side caucus and people can do a bio break, grab something to eat, and we will see you in 15 minutes.
So we're changing to a different meeting, right?
Let me just double check. Yes, we are. So you can sign out of this one. Thanks for that reminder.